What lurks in the desert darkness when holy women close their eyes to pray? Good evening, sleepy soul. Welcome back to another quiet story from the Sleepless Nun. Tonight, we descend into the spiritual battlegrounds where the first desert mothers fought enemies no human eye could see. In caves and cells across Egypt, Syria, and Palestine, women discovered that choosing God meant declaring war on forces that had stayed hidden while they lived ordinary lives. The desert strips everything bare, including the invisible realm. These women didn't just flee the world. They entered combat zones where thoughts became demons, where memories grew teeth, where the battle for the soul played out in terrifying clarity. They fought with weapons of fasting, prayer, and stubborn endurance. Some won, some lost. All were transformed. Dim your lights now. Let shadows gather in the corners. They're part of tonight's story. Feel how the darkness presses closer when you're alone, how silence amplifies every doubt, how isolation makes the mind vulnerable to visitors you didn't invite. This is the landscape our desert mothers knew intimately. Listen, do you hear that? It's not the wind. The desert mothers heard it too. The whisper that sounds like your own voice, but speaks words you'd never choose. The footstep that couldn't exist because you're alone. The presence that has no form, but fills the cell with dread. These are the adversaries we'll meet tonight. We'll walk with women who wrestled angels, who conversed with demons, who discovered that the greatest enemy often wore their own face. This is spiritual warfare at its most raw, most honest, most transformative. Not the dramatic exorcisms of popular imagination, but the grinding daily battle between the soul that seeks God and everything that seeks to prevent that union. Amma Theodora will teach us that demons often come dressed as memories. Using our own past as their sharpest weapon, Sarah of the Desert will show us that some battles last decades, and victory comes not from winning, but from refusing to yield. Syncletica will demonstrate how the most dangerous temptations arrive, disguised as reasonable suggestions, good ideas at the wrong time. We'll meet Mary of Egypt, whose 17 years as a prostitute gave her demons plenty of ammunition, yet who discovered that you can exhaust evil through sheer persistence. Matrona will warn us about false angels, those demons sophisticated enough to quote scripture and glow with counterfeit light. Pelagia will transform her phantom lovers into opportunities for prayer, weaponizing compassion against temptation. These weren't superstitious women frightened by shadows. They were scientists of the soul, mapping the geography of temptation with empirical precision. They developed taxonomies of deception, strategies for discernment, communal practices for collective defense. What they learned in their cells became the foundation of spiritual direction, the basis for centuries of monastic wisdom about the invisible combat every soul faces. The demons they fought weren't metaphors or psychological projections, at least not to them. These women experienced evil as a personal, intelligent force that knew exactly where to strike. Whether we name these adversaries demons, trauma, mental illness, or the shadow side of the psyche, matters less than understanding the battle itself. Because we all fight it, whether in desert cells or city apartments, whether in the 4th century or the 21st. If this journey brings you comfort, knowing that your own spiritual struggles echo across centuries, If these stories of women who faced the darkness and survived help you rest easier in your own shadows, tap subscribe when you're ready. Your presence helps these ancient victories find new warriors. But for now, just breathe. Just listen. Just let yourself sink into their world, where the line between seen and unseen was gossamer thin, where prayer was combat, where every thought required vigilance. We begin in the Sketis Desert, where an educated widow named Theodora has just discovered that her nightly visitors aren't coming from outside her cell. The desert wind carries more than sand tonight. It carries whispers of battles fought in silence, of victories won through endurance, of women who stared into the abyss until the abyss blinked first. The visitors always came at the third watch, that hollow hour when the soul sits loosest in the body and the walls between worlds grow thin. Theodora would be deep in prayer, her knees aching against the packed earth of her cell, when she'd hear the first whisper. Not outside, never outside. The whispers came from within the walls, within the air, within the darkness that pressed against her single oil lamp like a living thing with intentions. Theodora. The voice was different each night, but always familiar. Sometimes her mother, dead these 20 years. Sometimes her sister, drowned in the Nile when they were children. But most often, and this was the cruelest cut, it was Alexandros, her husband, using the pet name only he had known. My little dove, why do you kneel in the dirt? Come back to your soft bed. Come back to my arms. The children miss you. Don't you miss them? She'd fled to the desert to escape many things, but mostly to escape being mother and widow and all the other names that threatened to swallow who she really was. After Alexandros died and their 3 children followed him to the grave within a single year, fever, accident, another fever, she'd felt something inside her break loose. Not grief exactly, something wilder. Something that looked at her comfortable house in Constantinople and saw a tomb. Looked at the suitors already circling and saw vultures. Looked at the life everyone expected her to resume and saw death by 1,000 ordinary days. So she walked into the desert. Just walked. No great spiritual calling, no vision of angels. Just a woman following an instinct older than Christianity itself. The knowledge that sometimes the only way to save your life is to lose it completely. The first months had been about physical survival, learning which plants killed and which sustained, finding water, building a cell that could withstand sandstorms. The external challenges were almost a relief. They left no room for thinking. But once her body adapted, once the rhythms of desert life became automatic, that's when the real battle began. That's when the visitors started coming. You killed us. The voice that sounded like her eldest daughter whispered from the corner, where shadows pooled thickest. You were too busy with your books, your prayers. You didn't notice the fever until it was too late. A real mother would have known. A real mother would have saved us. Theodora's hands trembled on her prayer rope. But she didn't turn toward the voice. She'd learned that looking at them gave them power, made them more solid, more real. Instead, she continued her prayers, though the words felt like sand in her mouth. I notice you don't deny it, the voice continued, moving closer. She could feel its presence now, cold despite the desert heat that lingered even at night. Because you know it's true. You were always elsewhere, weren't you? Always dreaming of something beyond your duties, and we paid the price. This was the demon's particular genius. They didn't lie. Not exactly. They took truth and twisted it just enough to make it cut. Yes, she'd been distracted that last year. Yes, she'd spent hours reading when she could have been watching for signs of illness. Yes, she dreamed of freedom, even while her children lived. The demons took these small truths and sharpened them into weapons. For the first 3 years, she'd fought them as enemies, prayed for their banishment, fasted to weaken their hold, performed every spiritual exercise the other desert dwellers recommended. But they only grew stronger, fed by her resistance. The more she fought, the more substantial they became. Until some nights, her cell was so crowded with accusations, she could barely breathe. It was old Amatalis who'd given her the key, though she hadn't recognized it as such at the time. Theodora had walked the 2 days to the elder's cell, desperate for a cure to her torment. She'd expected prayers, exorcisms, holy water. Instead, Talis had served her tea and asked a simple question. "These demons of yours," the old woman said, her face mapped with decades of desert sun. "What do they want?" "To torment me, to drive me from the desert, to make me lose my faith, perhaps." Talis sipped her tea thoughtfully. "Or perhaps they want what all visitors want, to be heard, to be acknowledged, to deliver their message and move on." "You're saying I should listen to demons?" "I'm saying that sometimes the only way to defeat an enemy is to stop treating them as one. What if your demons are just parts of yourself you've tried to abandon in Constantinople? They followed you here because you can't actually leave yourself behind. You can only transform." Theodora had thought the old woman mad. But that night, when the voices came, she tried something different. Instead of praying for their banishment, she spoke to them directly. "You're right," she said to the voice that wore her daughter's sound. "I was distracted. I did dream of freedom. I was an imperfect mother. I carry that truth. What else do you need to tell me?" The demon seemed startled into silence. When it spoke again, the voice was less certain, less cruel. You admit it? Why would I deny what's true? I was imperfect. I am imperfect. I failed in many ways. But I also loved you with all the imperfect love I had. Both things are true. Can you accept that? The conversation that followed was unlike any spiritual warfare manual would recommend. She talked with her demon visitors as if they were exactly what they appeared to be. Her dead family, carrying grievances from beyond the grave. She acknowledged their pain without accepting their condemnation. She offered love without asking for forgiveness. She treated them, in essence, as guests who'd traveled a long way to deliver difficult truths. Night after night, the pattern repeated. New voices, new accusations, new truths twisted into weapons. Her husband complained of abandonment. Her mother accused her of selfishness. Her sister wondered why Theodora lived when she had died. And night after night, Theodora received them all with what she came to call terrible hospitality. The practice of welcoming what wanted to destroy you. "Yes, I abandoned you," she told her husband's voice. "But you abandoned me first, dying when I needed you. We both failed each other. That's what humans do." "Yes, I am selfish," she agreed with her mother. "I chose my own path over family expectations." "But isn't that what you always wanted to do? Didn't you dream of freedom too?" I don't know why I lived and you died, she admitted to her sister. But I'm trying to make my life worth the price of yours. Is that enough? Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the visits changed character. The voices still came, but they were less harsh, less accusatory. Sometimes they even brought comfort. Her daughter's voice would sing the lullabies Theodora had sung to her. Her husband would tell the jokes that had made her laugh. Her mother would share recipes, as if the afterlife still concerned itself with proper bread rising. "Are you really them?" Theodora asked one night, when the visitation felt particularly gentle. "Or are you just the parts of them I carry inside me?" "Does it matter?" her husband's voice replied. "We're here. You're here. The conversation continues." She realized then what Amatalis had meant. These weren't external demons in the classical sense. They were the unfinished business of her soul. The conversations she'd never had. The grief she'd tried to outrun by fleeing to the desert. They were demons of her own making, birthed from guilt and loss and the terrible complexity of human love. But understanding their nature didn't make them disappear. If anything, it made the work harder. External demons could theoretically be banished. Internal ones required integration. She had to learn to live with the voices, to make space in her spiritual life for the messy realities they represented. She developed practices that would later become standard in desert spirituality. The evening examination, where she'd review the day's thoughts and acknowledge the shadows before they could ambush her in the night. The morning dedication, where she'd invite all parts of herself, light and shadow, saint and sinner, to join in the day's prayer. The radical hospitality that welcomed every voice, every memory, every accusation as a teacher in disguise. "My demons," she would tell the disciples who eventually gathered around her, "were my strictest spiritual directors. They showed me every place I was still bound to the world I thought I'd left. They revealed every lie I told myself about my own holiness. They forced me to face the truth that we cannot flee ourselves. We can only transform ourselves, shadow and all." The young women who came to her for guidance expected her to teach them how to banish demons. Instead, she taught them how to serve tea to their shadows, how to have civilized conversations with their guilt, how to transform accusers into teachers through the alchemy of acknowledgement. "But Amma," one young sister protested, "surely we shouldn't welcome evil into our cells." "Evil?" Theodora smiled, her face carved by years of desert wind and difficult conversations. "Child, evil is what happens when we refuse to acknowledge the truth about ourselves. My voices told me hard truths wrapped in cruel words. When I learned to hear the truth without flinching from the cruelty, they lost their power to torment. Now they're just company. Difficult company, but company nonetheless." Not everyone understood. Some thought she'd been corrupted by demons, that her teaching was dangerous. But those who stayed and learned her methods discovered something revolutionary. The demons that had tormented them for years began to transform, not disappearing. Transformation is not erasure, but changing from tormentors to teachers, from enemies to strange allies in the work of self-knowledge. One young woman, tormented by visions of the children she'd never have after choosing virginity, learned to cradle her phantom babies with compassion rather than anguish. Another, haunted by her prostitute past, discovered that her demon clients became less lustful when she offered them the respect she'd never given the living men. A third, pursued by the voice of the mother she disobeyed by fleeing to the desert, found that acknowledging her mother's pain, without accepting her mother's plans, created space for a new kind of relationship. "This is dangerous theology," visiting monks would warn. "You're teaching women to consort with demons." "I'm teaching them to consort with themselves," Theodora would reply calmly, "which is far more dangerous and far more necessary. We cannot defeat what we refuse to face. We cannot transform what we will not touch. And we cannot find God while fleeing from half of His creation, including the shadow half of ourselves." As years passed, Theodora's cell became a place of pilgrimage for those tormented by voices, visions, and visitations. She never promised to banish their demons. Instead, she taught them her hard-won wisdom, that sometimes the only way out is through. That resistance strengthens what acknowledgement transforms. That our demons often carry distorted gifts if we're brave enough to unwrap them. Her own voices never completely ceased. On quiet nights, she still heard whispers from the walls. But the terror was gone, replaced by something almost like tenderness. These were her familiars now, the shadow court of her spiritual kingdom. They kept her honest, kept her humble, kept her human in a desert that could too easily breed spiritual pride. "Do you ever wish they would leave?" a visiting bishop asked once. Disturbed by her casual references to her ongoing conversations with the dead. "Leave?" Theodora considered this. "No, they're part of my practice now, part of my community. They remind me that sanctity isn't about perfection. It's about integration, about learning to dance with our shadows instead of trying to outrun them. Besides," she smiled, "after 20 years, I'd miss their company. Even difficult company is better than the lie of being alone with only our pretty thoughts." She died as she had lived, in conversation. The sisters who found her said she seemed to be speaking to invisible visitors, her face peaceful, her hands gesturing as if serving tea to old friends. Her last words, they reported, were, "Yes, I see. Thank you for telling me. Please, sit. Stay as long as you need." They buried her in the desert she'd made her home, but her teachings lived on. Not in official church doctrine. Her methods were too radical, too dangerous to institutional authority that preferred clear lines between good and evil. But in the whispered wisdom passed between desert mothers, in the secret knowledge that sometimes the greatest spiritual victory isn't banishing our demons, but inviting them to tea. Because Theodora had discovered a truth that threatened everything the church taught about spiritual warfare. That the line between angel and demon, like the line between saint and sinner, runs not between beings, but through them. That our shadows are not our enemies, but our teachers. That the voices in the walls might be the very voice of God, speaking through the parts of ourselves we've tried to abandon. In the end, her greatest teaching was simple. When the demons come, and they will come, ask them what they need. Listen to their grievances. Acknowledge their truths. Then serve them tea and continue your prayers. They're not interruptions to your spiritual life. They're part of it. Everything is part of it, even the parts we wish weren't there. The desert mothers who followed her knew what the official histories wouldn't record, that Alma Theodora had revolutionized spiritual warfare, not by defeating demons, but by transforming the very concept of defeat. In her cell, every night was a tea party with shadows, every voice a teacher in disguise, every visitation an opportunity for the radical hospitality that transforms both guest and host. She'd entered the desert fleeing her ghosts and discovered they followed her. But instead of an endless chase, she turned to face them, opened her door, and discovered that sometimes the only way to be free of the past is to make it welcome in the present. Her demons became her counsel. Her tormentors became her teachers. And in that transformation, she found a peace that transcended understanding, the peace of a woman no longer at war with herself. The desert wind carries away the whispers of reconciled ghosts. While by the river, another woman fights a demon that refuses all hospitality, demanding only war. Every day at the 6th hour, when the sun stood directly overhead and shadows disappeared, the demon came. Sarah knew its footstep on the path to her cell, heavier than wind, lighter than human presence. She knew its knock on her door. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, like a parody of the Trinity. She knew its voice when it called through the palm-frond walls. Silk and honey and promises that made her body remember what her soul was trying to forget. Sarah, beautiful Sarah, why do you waste such sweetness on the bitter desert? Come out. Let me see what the sun has done to that soft skin. Let me remind you what you're missing. 13 years. Every single day for 13 years, the same visitor at the same hour with the same invitation. You'd think she'd get used to it. You'd think the repetition would dull the impact. You'd be wrong. Some battles sharpen with time rather than soften. Some enemies grow stronger with familiarity, not weaker. Sarah had been 30 when she fled to the desert, leaving behind a life in Alexandria that the church fathers would have called sinful, but she had simply called survival. Not a prostitute exactly, but a woman who'd learned that beauty was currency and flesh was commodity in a world that offered women few other options. She'd had lovers, some paid, some not, all temporary. She'd known the weight of men's desire, the power and prison of being wanted. The conversion had come suddenly, a chance encounter with a Christian woman who spoke of virginity not as loss, but as wholeness. A sermon overheard about Mary of Egypt, the prostitute who became a saint. A moment of clarity in which she saw her life from the outside, the endless transactions, the hollow pleasures, the way desire consumed without nourishing. She'd walked into the desert that very week, trading silk for sackcloth, softness for sand, the known degradations for unknown possibilities. But the body has memory deeper than conversion. The flesh keeps its own calendar. And exactly 60 days into her new life, when the initial fervor had cooled and routine had set in, the demon arrived. It didn't come as a monster. That would have been easier. It came as everything she'd left behind, concentrated into a presence that knew exactly which memories would kindle fire in her blood. The demon was every lover who'd been gentle, every touch that had brought genuine pleasure, every moment when desire had felt like flying rather than falling. I know you remember Marcus, the voice would purr, the way he traced your spine like he was writing poetry. A way he knew exactly where to kiss to make you forget your own name. He asks about you, you know, wonders where his desert flower has gone. The first time, Sarah had tried to pray it away, fell to her knees and begged God to remove this temptation. But the demon only laughed, a sound like wine being poured in a cool room. She tried the traditional remedies, fasting until her body was too weak to want anything but water. But desire, she discovered, could survive on nothing, could grow stronger when the body grew weaker, as if it were feeding on her very essence. She tried cold baths in the Nile, shocking her system into submission. But the water only reminded her of other baths, other waters, other kinds of immersion. She tried violent remedies, striking herself when thoughts arose, wearing thorns against her skin to associate desire with pain. But her body, trained by years of navigating the boundary between pleasure and pain, only incorporated the sensation into its repertoire. The demon laughed at these attempts. "You think pain defeats me? Sweet girl, don't you remember how pain and pleasure dance together? How many men asked you to hurt them just a little to make the sweetness sweeter? You're only giving me more material to work with." After a year of this daily torture, Sarah sought help from the other desert dwellers. But their advice was clearly meant for those who'd lived cleaner lives. "Think of your mother," one hermit suggested. "Remember your innocence as a child." But Sarah's mother had sold her at 12, and her innocence was a memory too distant to reach. "Picture Christ's suffering," another counseled, but that only reminded her of bodies in pain, which led to other associations she was trying to avoid. It was an old woman, Amma Theodora, who gave her the only useful advice. "Stop trying to defeat it," she said simply. "Some demons aren't meant to be conquered. They're meant to be outlasted." Outlasted? For how long? "As long as it takes. Maybe forever. Does it matter? You're not in the desert to win. You're here to continue." This shifted something fundamental in Sarah's understanding. She'd been treating the demon like an enemy to defeat, a test to pass, a phase to transcend. What if it was none of those things? What if it was simply part of her desert experience, as permanent as the sand and sun? She developed a new approach. When the demon came each day, she neither fled nor fought. She simply acknowledged its presence and continued whatever she was doing. Weaving baskets? She wove while it whispered. Praying? She prayed while it painted pictures in her mind. Preparing food? She cooked while it reminded her of other appetites. "This is my practice," she would say, calmly to the presence that tried to disturb her peace. "You are my practice. Every day you come, and every day I choose this life again. Thank you for the opportunity to choose." The demon, faced with this strange non-resistance, grew more creative. It brought not just memories, but possibilities, showed her the life she could have, still beautiful at 43. She could return to Alexandria, set herself up discreetly, choose her clients, have comfort, pleasure, the power that comes from being desired. Why suffer in the desert when the city would welcome her back? "Because," Sarah would reply, continuing to weave her baskets, "I've tasted that life. I know exactly what it offers and what it costs. Yes, there would be pleasure. Yes, there would be comfort. But there would not be this person I'm becoming, this strength I'm building, this conversation we're having. Strange as it seems, demon, I value our daily struggle more than I value the easy pleasures you're selling." Years passed. The demon never missed a day. Sarah never missed her response. They became like an old married couple, locked in a routine that had its own strange comfort. Other hermits marveled at her persistence. Disciples came seeking her wisdom about fighting temptation. She disappointed them all with the same message. There is no fighting. There is only continuing. "But Amma," they would protest, Surely God will deliver you from this demon if you pray correctly. Fast properly. Believe fully. Perhaps, Sarah would say, her hands never pausing in their work. Or perhaps God's deliverance looks like this: the strength to face the same battle every day without breaking. The grace to choose virtue, not from innocence, but from knowledge. The miracle of remaining here when every cell in my body remembers easier ways. She developed a theology of endurance that influenced desert spirituality for generations. Victory, she taught, wasn't the absence of temptation, but presence despite it. Holiness wasn't purity, but persistence. The crown, and here she would smile at the metaphor she'd earned, came not from conquering, but from continuing. If I prayed God to take this battle from me, became her famous saying, I would have no contest, and without contest, no crown. My demon is my training partner. Every day we spar, and every day I grow stronger. Not strong enough to defeat it. That's not the point. Strong enough to face it again tomorrow. That's all. That's everything. Sign. Disciples noticed something strange about Amasera. Unlike other desert mothers who grew ethereal with age, she remained vibrantly, almost uncomfortably embodied. Her teachings were earthier, more practical, less focused on transcending the flesh than on inhabiting it honestly. She spoke of the body not as enemy, but as battleground, not as something to escape, but as something to acknowledge. We are not angels, she would remind the young women who came to her. We are flesh that remembers pleasure, minds that replay sensation, bodies that were designed for connection. The desert doesn't erase this. It clarifies it, shows us exactly what we're made of, and then asks us to choose, again and again, to be more than our making. The demon, for its part, seemed to develop its own grudging respect for her. The daily visits continued, but the tone shifted. Less seduction, more philosophical debate. Less cruelty, more genuine curiosity. Why? It asked one day, after 11 years of the same routine. I understand the others. The virgins protecting their treasure, the mothers fleeing their failures. But you? You've tasted everything I offer. You know it's not all degradation. There was sweetness, too. Why choose this dry existence when you could have fullness? Because, Sarah replied, her voice thoughtful after over a decade of this conversation. Fullness isn't fullness if it leaves you empty afterward. Every pleasure you remind me of was real, yes, but temporary, consuming. What I'm building here, this daily choice, this accumulated strength, this conversation between us, this lasts. This transforms. This takes a woman who knew only how to be consumed and teaches her how to be constant. You could have both, the demon suggested, but even it sounded uncertain now. No, Sarah said with the certainty of long experience. I couldn't. I'm not built for moderation. I'm a woman of extremes, extreme pleasure or extreme discipline. The middle ground is not my territory. So I choose the extreme that builds rather than the one that diminishes. Even if it means entertaining you every day until I die. The 13th year brought a subtle shift. The demon still came daily, still offered its whispered temptations. But now there was something almost companionable about their exchange. Two old adversaries who defined each other through opposition. Sarah realized with some amusement that she might actually miss the demon if it stopped coming. It had become part of her spiritual practice, as essential as prayer or fasting. "We're growing old together," she told it one day. "You and I. 13 years of the same dance. Do you ever tire of it?" "Do you?" the demon countered. "Sometimes," Sarah admitted. "But then I remember, this is what I chose. Not ease, but effort. Not resolution, but relationship, even with you." When young disciples complained about persistent temptations, about battles that seemed to have no end, Sarah would smile with hard-won wisdom. "You think the goal is to reach a place where you're not tempted? Child, that place doesn't exist this side of death. The goal is to become someone who can be tempted every day and still choose your path. The goal is to make friends with the part of yourself that wants to run, to acknowledge it, honor it even, but not obey it." "How long is your life?" Sarah would respond. "That long, maybe longer. The demon of fornication has been visiting me daily for 13 years. It may visit for 13 more. Or 30. Does it matter? Each day I face it is a day I choose this life again. Each encounter is a renewal of my vows. Without the demon, how would I know my choice still matters?" She taught them practical techniques born from long experience. Don't argue with the demon. That gives it energy. Don't try to ignore it. That's impossible. Instead, acknowledge it like weather. "Ah, you're here. Yes, I remember that pleasure. Yes, it was real. Now where did I put that half-finished basket?" She taught them that some demons come to be defeated, others to be endured. And wisdom lies in knowing the difference. That the body's memories are not sins, but facts, not enemies, but teachers. That holiness isn't found in never being tempted, but in being tempted and choosing anyway, day after day, until the choosing itself becomes a form of prayer. Her fame spread, this woman who faced a demon of fornication every day without flinching. But she refused to be made into a plaster saint. When bishops came seeking inspirational stories of victory over temptation, she disappointed them with the truth. There was no victory, only continuation. When artists wanted to depict her trampling the demon underfoot, she corrected them. The demon stood beside her, not beneath her, a permanent companion in her desert journey. "You make it sound hopeless," one young monk complained. "As if we're doomed to eternal struggle." State. "Not doomed," Sarah corrected gently. "Invited. Invited to discover that we're stronger than we think. That we can face our deepest hungers every day and still choose our path. That the struggle itself is the transformation. I've been meeting my demon daily for 13 years. I'm not the same woman who met it the first time. Neither is it the same demon. We've shaped each other, refined each other, become, strange as it sounds, necessary to each other." She lived another 20 years in that cell by the Nile. 20 more years of daily visits from the demon of fornication. 20 more years of choosing her desert life over the pleasures that called to her with voices of silk and memory. The routine never varied. The 6th hour would come. The demon would appear. The temptations would flow like honeyed wine. And Sarah would continue whatever task occupied her hands, while her soul performed its daily acrobatics of acknowledgement and refusal. In her final years, she became something of a legend. Not for defeating her demon, she never claimed that victory, but for outlasting it. For proving that human will could be stronger than human desire, not through suppression, but through sheer, persistent choice. Pilgrims came from across the empire to meet the woman who'd faced the same temptation every day for 33 years and never yielded. "What's your secret?" they all wanted to know. There is no secret. Sarah would tell them, her hands still working, still creating, still transforming raw materials into useful objects, just as she'd transformed raw desire into spiritual endurance. There is only showing up. Every day the demon comes. Every day I choose this life instead. Tomorrow it will come again. Tomorrow I will choose again. That's all. That's everything. Some left disappointed. They'd wanted magic words, special prayers, techniques that would banish temptation forever. Sarah had none to offer. Only the hard wisdom that some battles are not meant to be won, but lived. That some demons become our teachers through opposition. That the crown comes not from conquering, but from continuing. On her final day, the other sisters said, "The demon came as usual at the 6th hour." But this time, Sarah was too weak to rise from her mat. She lay there, nearly 80 years old, her body finally wearing out from decades of desert life. "So," the demon said, and witnesses swore they heard sadness in its voice, "our dance is ending." "Is it?" Sarah whispered. "Or are you coming with me to whatever comes next? We've been together so long. I can't imagine eternity without our daily conversation." "You never hated me," the demon observed. "Even at the beginning. Why?" "Because you were part of my path," Sarah replied, her voice fading but clear. "Without you, how would I have learned my own strength? Without your daily visits, how would I have renewed my daily choice? You think you were my enemy, but you were my practice, my discipline, my strange companion on this journey toward God. I could have broken you, should have broken you. A former courtesan with a body full of memories. You should have been easy prey." "Perhaps," Sarah smiled, "but you underestimated something. You thought my past was my weakness. It was my strength. I knew exactly what I was choosing and exactly what I was refusing. The virgins who come here flee what they imagine. I fled what I knew. That makes my choice harder, but also more real, more solid, more impossible to shake." The demon was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'll miss you, Sarah of the desert. In 33 years, you never made it easy, never gave in, never even truly weakened. Just that steady, impossible daily no that was really a yes to something else." "I'll miss you too," Sarah admitted. "Who will remind me tomorrow that I'm choosing this life? Who will give weight to my decision? Without temptation, what is virtue? Without struggle, what is strength?" She died at the 9th hour, 3 hours after the demon's final visit. The sisters who prepared her body for burial said she looked peaceful, but also somehow incomplete, as if a central part of her story was missing. They buried her by the Nile, within sight of the cell where she'd fought her daily battle for over 3 decades. But her teaching lived on, carved into the spiritual DNA of desert monasticism. The understanding that some battles are permanent, that victory isn't always about winning, that our demons might be our strictest teachers, our most consistent spiritual directors, the whetstones against which we sharpen our souls. Young women struggling with persistent temptations would be sent to study Sarah's sayings. Not for comfort, she offered little of that, but for the stark recognition that the spiritual life isn't about reaching a place beyond struggle, but about becoming someone who can struggle beautifully. who can face the same enemy every day and choose the same response, who can find in that repetition not defeat, but a kind of glory. If I prayed God to take this battle from me, I would have no contest. These words, more than any others, became her legacy. The recognition that our battles might be our blessings, that our demons might be our dancers, partnering us in a choreography that transforms both participants. That the goal isn't to eliminate struggle, but to struggle well. Centuries later, when the desert had given way to convents, and the raw spirituality of the early mothers had been tamed into rules and regulations, Sarah's story still whispered its subversive truth, that holiness isn't purity, but persistence, that saints aren't those who never fall, but those who fall toward God, that the demon of fornication, faced daily for 33 years, might be a better spiritual director than any human guide. Because Sarah had learned what institutional religion preferred to forget, that we are not saved from our humanity, but through it, that our desires, acknowledged and redirected rather than denied, become the very fuel of our transformation, that the demon who comes every day at the 6th hour might be the truest friend we have, the one who never lets us forget we're choosing, always choosing, between the life we've known and the life we're creating. In the end, her greatest victory wasn't over the demon, but over the idea of victory itself. She'd replaced conquest with conversation, battle with dance, the myth of arrival with the reality of journey. And in doing so, she'd shown every woman who came after that the spiritual life isn't about becoming invulnerable, but about becoming unbreakable. Not because we're never tempted, but because we can be tempted every day for 33 years and still choose our path. The demon of fornication still visits the desert, they say, still whispers its honeyed invitations to those who've chosen solitude over satisfaction. But now it comes with a warning, passed down through generations of desert mothers. Beware of Sarah's daughters. They know the secret. They'll outlast you. They'll make you their teacher. They'll thank you for coming, even as they refuse what you offer. They've learned that the battle itself is the blessing, and they'll dance with you until the end of time. And somewhere by the Nile, where an old woman chose the same hard path every day for decades, the sand still whispers her essential teaching. There is no secret. There is only showing up. The demon will come. You will choose. Tomorrow, it will come again. Tomorrow, you will choose again. That's all. That's everything. That's enough. The river carries away the echo of daily battles, while in Alexandria's shadow, another woman discovers that the most dangerous demons come dressed as angels. The first demon came dressed as her mother, which should have been Syncletica's first warning. Her mother had been dead for 15 years, but here she stood, in the doorway of the desert cell, wearing the same blue silk she'd been buried in, smelling of the same rosewater she'd favored in life, every detail perfect, every word precisely what her mother would have said. My darling daughter, look at you. Skin like leather, hair like straw. Is this what I raised you for? Come home. Your father's house still stands empty. You could do so much good there. Feed the poor from a full kitchen instead of an empty cell. Serve God in comfort rather than this theatrical suffering. For a moment, just a moment, Syncletica wavered. The voice was so perfectly her mother's, The logic so reasonable. Why was she out here in the desert when she could use her inheritance to help others? Wasn't charity more valuable than solitude? Wasn't service better than silence? But something in the eyes was wrong. Her mother's eyes had been warm brown, flecked with gold. These eyes were brown too, but flat, dead, like painted stones. "You're not my mother," Syncletica said quietly. The figure smiled, and the smile was all wrong too. Too wide, too knowing. "Of course I am! Who else would care enough to walk all this way to save you from your foolishness? My mother is dead, and even alive, she supported my choice. She understood that God calls us to different paths. You're wearing her face, but you don't know her heart." The demon, for now it revealed itself as such, laughed. The sound was like glass breaking in honey, sweet and sharp simultaneously. "Clever girl, but I'll be back. And next time, I'll wear a face you won't recognize as false." This was the beginning of Syncletica's particular trial. Where other desert mothers faced consistent demons, lust, pride, despair in their familiar forms, Syncletica faced a shapeshifter, a demon of deception that came in 1,000 guises, each more cunning than the last. It was spiritual warfare at the highest level, requiring not just endurance, but constant discernment. The next visit came 3 days later. This time it was an angel, glowing softly in the pre-dawn darkness, wings of white fire, face beautiful beyond human beauty. It spoke of her special calling, her exceptional holiness, how God had chosen her above all other desert dwellers for revelations that would shake the world. "Write down my words," the angel commanded. "You will be the prophet of the new age, greater than the apostles, for they knew Christ in flesh, while you know him in spirit." The temptation was exquisite. Not to sin, but to spiritual pride, to believe she was special, chosen, elevated above her sisters. Syncletica had fled Alexandria's wealth only to be offered heaven's treasures. But she'd learned from the first encounter. She looked closer. The angel's light hurt to look at, not with the clean pain of holiness, but with something that felt like corruption dressed in brilliance. Its words, for all their beauty, left her feeling isolated rather than connected, proud rather than humble. Real angels, she remembered from scripture, always began with "fear not," and left humans feeling smaller, not larger. "If you're truly from God," she said carefully, "you won't mind if I test your message against scripture and the wisdom of my elders." The angel's perfect face twisted for just a moment, a flash of something hideous beneath the beauty. "You dare question heaven's messenger? Your doubt proves your unworthiness." "My doubt proves my humanity," Syncletica replied calmly. "And God works through human doubt as much as through certainty. A true angel would know that." The false angel departed in a shower of sparks that smelled of sulfur, not sanctity. But Syncletica knew it would return. The shapeshifter was testing her, learning her weaknesses, refining its approach. This was not a battle to be won once, but a war to be fought daily with an enemy that learned from each encounter. She began keeping a journal, itself a radical act for a woman in that time and place. But she needed to track the deceptions, to map the patterns, to develop what she would later call the science of discernment. Each encounter carefully recorded, each deception analyzed, each victory and near defeat studied for lessons. The demon came as a bishop, offering to ordain her as a deaconess, promising influence and authority. It came as a sick child needing healing, trying to lure her into pride when her prayers seemed to work. It came as a theological scholar, engaging her in debates that subtly twisted Scripture. It came as her own younger self, reminding her of dreams abandoned. But its cleverest disguise was as doubt itself. It whispered in her own internal voice, using her own vocabulary, her own thought patterns. "You're wasting your life out here. You're not holy, just stubborn. Everyone sees through your pretense. Even your prayers are performance." This was the hardest deception to counter because it sounded exactly like her own self-examination. Syncletica developed a threefold test that became standard in desert discernment. First, the fruit test. What did the encounter produce in her soul? Peace or agitation? Humility or pride? Connection or isolation? Real divine encounters, however challenging, ultimately produced good fruit. The demon's visits, however pleasant, left thorns. Second, the scripture test. Did the message align with the God revealed in Scripture? Not just in words. The demon could quote Scripture better than most priests, but in spirit? The God of Scripture was paradoxical but consistent. The demon's God shifted with each disguise. Third, the community test. This was the hardest for a solitary hermit, but Syncletica maintained connections with other desert mothers. She would share her encounters, seek their wisdom. The demon hated this most of all. It preferred isolated targets. Community was antidote to deception. But how do you know your advisors aren't demons too? The shapeshifter taunted during one visit, appearing as Amma Theodora herself. "I don't with absolute certainty," Syncletica admitted, "but absolute certainty is your currency, not God's. God works through trust, through relationship, through the humble acceptance that we might be wrong. You offer certainty because you know it's the opposite of faith." As years passed, the encounters became more sophisticated. The demon learned to pass her initial tests, to mimic good fruit for a season, to quote Scripture with orthodox precision, even to encourage community, but always with a twist, always with a hook hidden in the bait. It appeared as Christ himself once, wounded hands extended, offering to take her suffering, to grant her rest. This was almost her undoing. The figure was perfect, the right mix of divinity and humanity, suffering and glory. But when it spoke of her specialness, of secrets revealed only to her, she recognized the familiar pattern. The real Christ she knew from Scripture and tradition, revealed himself to the humble and hid from the proud. This Christ was too eager to make her exceptional. "Even if you were Christ," she said, trembling with the effort of potential blasphemy, "I would rather err on the side of caution than accept special revelations that separate me from my sisters. The Christ I follow makes us one body, not competing prophets." The false Christ's mask slipped, revealing the fury beneath, but also, strangely, something like respect. "You're learning," it hissed as it faded, "but I'm learning too. We'll dance this dance until one of us breaks." "Then we'll dance forever," Syncletica replied, "because I've learned the secret. The dance itself is the teaching. You're not my enemy. You're my instructor in discernment. Every deception you bring sharpens my ability to see clearly. Every mask you wear teaches me to look deeper. You think you're tempting me, but you're training me. This shift in perspective changed everything. Instead of dreading the demon's visits, she began to anticipate them as opportunities for growth. She would prepare for each encounter like a student preparing for an exam. What new deception would it attempt? What weakness would it exploit? What truth would it twist? The demon, faced with this strange eagerness, grew frustrated. It tried overwhelming her with multiple deceptions at once. It tried long absences, followed by intense attacks. It tried the truth, appearing as itself and offering honest bargains. But Syncletica had developed an immunity to deception through exposure. Like a physician who handles diseases until developing resistance, she had been inoculated against lies by facing so many. Her journal became a textbook for future generations. On Discernment would be copied and studied in monasteries for centuries. But the original was more raw, more honest about the difficulty of distinguishing truth from lies when the lies came dressed in heaven's wardrobe. The most dangerous demon, she wrote, is not the one who appears as obvious evil. It's the one who appears as good out of place, truth out of time, virtue out of balance. The demon that tells a fasting hermit to fast more. The demon that tells a charitable soul to give beyond wisdom. The demon that takes our virtues and pushes them past virtue into vice. Young disciples began seeking her out, drawn by her reputation as a master of discernment. She would test them immediately, sometimes having another sister pretend to be her, sometimes speaking obvious falsehoods to see if they'd challenge her. Those who accepted everything without question were sent away. Those who questioned everything were also dismissed. But those who showed the beginning of discernment, the ability to hold both trust and skepticism in creative tension, these she trained. The goal, she taught them, is not to become impossible to deceive. That's pride talking. The goal is to become someone who can be deceived and recover, who can fall for a deception, recognize it, learn from it, and face the next one with gained wisdom rather than lost faith. She taught them to look for the subtle signs, the way false visions left them feeling special rather than humbled, the way deceptive voices isolated them from community, the way demonic suggestions, however holy they sounded, always pushed toward extremes rather than balance. But Amma, one young disciple asked, how can we ever be sure we're not being deceived? You can't, Syncletica replied simply. And that's the point. The demon of deception wants you to crave certainty, to grasp for absolute knowledge. But faith lives in the space between knowing and unknowing. We do our best. We test the spirits. We seek wisdom in community, and we accept that we might be wrong. That acceptance, that humility, is our greatest protection against deception. As she aged, the demon's visits became less frequent, but more subtle. It no longer bothered with dramatic disguises, but came as whispers of doubt, gentle suggestions that seemed entirely reasonable. It had learned that the frontal assault failed against her defenses, so it tried erosion instead. But Syncletica had learned too. She recognized the shapeshifter in its subtlest forms. More importantly, she had developed a community of discernment, sisters who checked each other's perceptions, who served as mirrors for each other's blind spots. The demon could deceive one, maybe even two, But it couldn't maintain a deception against a community committed to truth. Her final teaching on the subject was her most radical. Thank God for the demon of deception. Without it, how would we learn discernment? Without false visions, how would we recognize true ones? Without lies dressed as truth, how would we learn to see past surfaces? Every demon comes bearing gifts, if we have eyes to see them. The shapeshifter's gift is the hardest and most valuable. The ability to see clearly in a world full of masks. She died at 90, clear-eyed to the end. The sisters who attended her reported that in her final hours she seemed to be in conversation with an invisible visitor. Her last words were, "Ah, old friend, one last disguise? But I see you. I've always seen you. Thank you for the lessons. Now let's see what truth looks like without any masks at all." They buried her with her journal, that precious record of a lifetime spent learning to see clearly. But copies had already spread throughout the desert, teaching countless others the delicate art of discernment. Her legacy was not victory over deception, but the tools to navigate it. Not immunity to lies, but recovery from them. Not certainty, but the faithful uncertainty that keeps testing, keeps learning, keeps growing. The shapeshifter still haunts the desert, they say, still comes in its 1,000 forms to those who seek God in solitude. But now it comes with caution. For Syncletica's daughters have learned her lessons well. They know to test the spirits. They know to seek wisdom in community. They know that the most beautiful angel might be a demon, and the most persistent demon might be their greatest teacher. And somewhere in the space between truth and lies, between certainty and doubt, between the mask and the face beneath, they dance the ancient dance of discernment that Syncletica choreographed with her whole life. A dance that says, "Come, deceiver, show me your newest mask. Teach me to see more clearly. Help me grow in wisdom. Transform my weakness into strength." For the shapeshifter's greatest defeat was not being banished, but being transformed. From enemy into educator. From deceiver into trainer of truth-seers. Syncletica had won, not by destroying her demon, but by making it serve God's purposes, despite itself. The ultimate discernment, the perfect transformation, the victory that looks like dance. The masks fall away one by one, while in the Jordanian desert, a woman faces demons that need no disguises. They wear her own memories like skin. The memories came at sunset, when the desert heat finally began to break, and her body remembered what it was like to be touched by something gentler than sand and sun. 17 years of prostitution in Alexandria had written themselves into her flesh, like tattoos, invisible to the eye, but perfectly clear to the soul. Every client's face, every transaction, every moment when she'd traded pieces of herself for bread or passage, or sometimes just the fleeting power of being wanted, they all returned in the cooling air like ghosts made of sensation. Mary had been in the desert 7 years now, but her past had followed her every step of the way. She'd thought the vast emptiness would erase what Alexandria had written on her. Instead, the silence amplified it, without new experiences to overlay the old. Without the blessed distraction of daily survival in the city, the memories played on endless loop. Her own mind had become her torturer, her own history her demon. Knight, like every night, They came in procession. First, the early ones, when she'd been 12 and hungry, and someone had offered bread for something that seemed so small to give. The confusion of that first time, not understanding why the man cried afterward, or why she felt like something inside her had shifted permanently. Then, the learning years, when she discovered her power, how men's eyes would follow her, how their need could be transformed into her survival. The demon didn't need to be creative. It simply played back what had happened, but with commentary now. Remember Marcus? The one who said he loved you? You almost believed him. For 3 whole days, you thought maybe you could be something other than what you'd become. Then you found him with that virgin bride, the one he could take home to mother. You were practice, Mary. You were always just practice. She sat in her cave, watching the memories unspool like thread from a spindle. The kind ones hurt most. The few men who tried to see her as human, who'd offered marriage or protection or escape. She'd refused them all, not from nobility, but from the terrible knowledge that she'd already become something that couldn't be saved by ordinary love. The demon reminded her of each refusal, each chance at redemption she'd walked away from. "I wasn't ready," she said aloud to the empty desert. "I couldn't have been anyone's wife. I didn't know how to be anything but what I was." "Exactly," the demon agreed, its voice indistinguishable from her own thoughts. "You were ruined, are ruined. This desert posturing doesn't change that. You can fast until your bones, pray until your knees are stone, but you'll always be Mary the whore. That's what's written in your cells. That's what God sees when he looks at you." For the first 7 years, she'd fought this assault traditionally. When the memories came, she'd pray harder. When specific faces appeared, she'd fast more severely. When her body remembered pleasure, she'd punish it with thorns and stones and sleepless vigils. But the demon only grew stronger, fed by her resistance. The more she fought her past, the more present it became. It was exhaustion that taught her the first lesson. Simply too tired to fight anymore. Too worn down to maintain the constant vigilance against memory. One night, instead of praying the images away, she just let them come. Let them play their scenes, let them say their pieces, and discovered something unexpected. Memories, like waves, have a natural rhythm. They crash and recede. They exhaust themselves if you don't feed them with resistance. So she developed a new practice. When the demon brought her past, she'd acknowledge it like weather. Yes, that happened. Yes, I did that. Yes, I was her. No justification, no self-flagellation. Just simple acknowledgement of what was. The demon, faced with this non-resistance, grew cunning. It stopped showing her the degrading memories and started showing the ecstatic ones. The times when the pleasure had been real. The moments of genuine connection, however fleeting. The nights when she'd felt powerful, desired, alive in every nerve. "You think God can give you this?" it whispered, replaying a particularly intense encounter. "You think prayer compares to this? You're dying out here, Mary, drying up like fruit in the sun. For what? For a God who won't even speak to you directly? At least in Alexandria, you knew you were alive." This was harder to counter. Because the demon was right. She had felt alive then, in a twisted way. The constant danger, the nightly negotiations, the dance of desire and power and survival had created an intensity that the desert's monotony couldn't match. Prayer was subtle. Divine presence was quiet. Compared to the violent vitality of her former life, holiness felt like death. But Mary had learned something in her years of solitude. She'd learned to outlast, not to conquer, not to transform, but simply to endure, to let the waves of memory crash over her and wait for them to recede, to acknowledge the truth in the demon's words without accepting its conclusions. Yes, she would say to the memories of intensity. That was life of a kind, but it was life that consumed itself. Each night of ecstasy cost a piece of soul. I'm not dying in the desert. I'm learning to live without eating myself alive. The demon tried different tactics. It showed her the life she could still have. At 47, she remained beautiful in a weathered way. She could return to Alexandria, set herself up discreetly, choose her clients, have comfort, companionship, the particular power that comes from giving men what they desperately need. Look at yourself, it said, forcing her to see her reflection in a rare pool of water. Skin like leather, hair like wire, breasts empty sacks. Is this what God wants? This waste of beauty? You could still give pleasure, still receive it, still matter to someone, somewhere. Mary looked at her reflection and laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. I am exactly what my choices have made me. In Alexandria, I was consumed. Here, I am preserved, not beautiful, but lasting, not desired, but whole. Years passed. The demon never stopped coming, but its visits became almost companionable. It would replay her memories, and she would watch them like viewing someone else's life. It would offer her alternatives, and she would decline them like turning down invitations to parties she no longer enjoyed. They developed a rhythm, she and her demon, a dance of offer and refusal that had its own strange comfort. Other hermits, hearing of her past, would sometimes seek her out for wisdom about fighting the demons of sexuality. They expected dramatic advice, extreme fasting, violent mortifications, special prayers. Instead, she disappointed them with simplicity. Let them come, she would say. Your memories, your desires, your past, let them all come. Watch them like you'd watch clouds. Some are dark, some are bright. All are passing. The demon wants you to fight because fighting feeds it. Stop feeding it. Let it exhaust itself against your patience. But how long? They would ask, desperate for a timeline. How long is your life? Mary would respond. The demon of my past has been with me for 20 years in this desert. It may stay for 20 more. But each year it grows weaker, while I grow stronger. Not stronger in resistance, but stronger in acceptance. I am what I was. I am also what I am becoming. Both are true. The demon can only show me one truth. I choose to live both. She developed teachings that scandalize the more traditional hermits. She spoke of integrating the past rather than erasing it, of acknowledging desire rather than pretending it didn't exist, of treating one's history as teacher rather than enemy. But surely, one young monk protested, we must reject our sinful past entirely? Cut it off like a diseased limb? And what happens to cut limbs? Mary asked. They rot. They poison the ground. Better to transform than amputate. I don't reject Mary the prostitute. I include her. She knew things I needed to know. She survived things I needed to survive. She is part of my path to God, not an obstacle to it. This was radical theology. The idea that sin could be incorporated rather than excised, that the past could be transformed rather than destroyed. But Mary had lived it. Every client's face that haunted her also taught her about human need. Every degrading memory also showed her resilience. Every moment of false intimacy also revealed the shape of what true intimacy might be. The demon, for its part, seemed to evolve with her understanding. Its attacks became less vicious, more philosophical. It would engage her in debates about the nature of holiness, the value of suffering, the meaning of transformation. Sometimes she wasn't sure if she was talking to a demon or to the parts of herself she'd been trying to integrate. "What am I to you now?" it asked one night after replaying a particularly complex memory. One that mixed degradation with genuine human connection. "You're my library," Mary replied after long thought. "My record of who I was, my reminder of why I chose this path, my teacher in the hardest lessons. Without you, I might forget, might romanticize, might think holiness is simple. You keep me honest. And if I left, if I stopped bringing these memories?" Mary considered this. After 30 years, 7 in the city since conversion, 23 in the desert, the demon had become part of her spiritual practice. Its daily presentations of her past had become a form of examination of conscience, a way of measuring how far she'd come and how far she had yet to go. "I think I'd miss you," she admitted. "Is that strange? To miss one's demon? But you've been my companion longer than any human. You've seen me more clearly than any confessor. In your cruel mirror, I've learned to see myself with both judgment and compassion. If you left, I'd have to learn to be my own demon. And I'm not sure I'm ready for that responsibility." The demon was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Perhaps that's the goal all along. To teach you to carry your own past without my help. To be your own rememberer, your own integrator. Your own transformer of memory into wisdom." This conversation marked a shift. The demon still came, but less frequently. When it did appear, it brought memories Mary had forgotten. Not the traumatic ones, but the small moments of grace. A client who'd taught her to read. A woman who'd shared bread when she was hungry. A child she'd helped escape the same life. Memories that complicated her narrative of complete degradation. "You see," the demon said, "even in hell, heaven leaves fingerprints. Even in your worst life, God was preparing you for this one. Every skill you learned, reading men's needs, surviving violence, finding power in powerlessness, you use them all here, transformed. You couldn't be the hermit you are without having been the whore you were." This was the final teaching, the one that would influence desert spirituality for generations. The past is not overcome, but incorporated. Sin is not erased, but transformed. The demon is not defeated, but educated into becoming an ally. The very things that drove us from God, properly understood, can become the very things that drive us to God. When the monk Zosimus found her in her 47th year of desert life, he expected to find a saint who'd conquered her past. Instead, he found a woman who'd made peace with it. who could speak of her prostitution without shame or pride. The same way I bear the weight of my body, Mary replied. It's mine. It's what I have to work with. It's the raw material God gave me to shape into something useful. You don't bear weight by pretending it doesn't exist. You bear it by distributing it properly, by learning to carry it with grace. She died shortly after that meeting, her story preserved only because Zosimus couldn't forget the woman who'd transformed prostitution into prayer, who'd made her demon into her teacher, who'd proving that the worst past could become the best preparation for holiness. But her real legacy lived on in the whispered teachings passed between desert mothers. You cannot run from what you were. You can only transform it into what you're becoming. Your demon knows your true name, your real history, your actual sins. Make friends with it. Learn from it. Let it teach you the hardness of the path by showing you exactly what you're choosing to leave behind. Because Mary of Egypt had discovered the paradox that threatened everything the church taught about repentance, sometimes the best way to overcome the past is to embrace it. Sometimes the only way to defeat a demon is to outlast it. Sometimes the prostitute makes the best saint because she knows exactly what she's choosing and exactly what it costs. In the end, her 47 years in the desert weren't about erasing 17 years in Alexandria. They were about transforming those 17 years into wisdom, incorporating that experience into holiness, proving that God wastes nothing, not even sin, not even degradation, not even the memories that come at sunset to remind us who we were before we knew who we could become. The demon of her past became her spiritual director. Her memories became her prayers. Her sins became her strengths. And in that transformation, she showed every woman after her that the path to God doesn't require a clean past, just a willingness to walk forward with whatever past you have, trusting that even demons can become angels when loved long enough. The desert swallows another transformed sinner, while in the mountains of Lebanon, a woman learns that the most dangerous demons come dressed as angels of light. The angel first appeared on the Feast of the Annunciation, which should have been Matrona's first warning. Real angels, she would later understand, rarely had such perfect timing. But in that moment, kneeling in her mountain cave, after 40 days of fasting, when the being of light materialized before her, she felt only the ecstasy of the chosen. It was everything she'd imagined an angel would be. Wings that seemed woven from dawn itself. A face too beautiful for human eyes to fully comprehend. Light that didn't hurt to look at, but instead filled her with warmth, with belonging, with the absolute certainty that her years of struggle had finally borne fruit. When it spoke, its voice was like harmonized bells, like water over stones, like every beautiful sound distilled into words. "Matrona, beloved of the Most High," it said, and she felt her heart swell with a pride she didn't yet recognize as dangerous. Your devotion has opened heaven's gates. You have been chosen above your sisters to receive revelations that will shake the foundations of the church. For 6 months, this was her secret glory. The angel came nightly, always after her prayers, always with new revelations. It taught her interpretations of Scripture that no theologian had discovered. It revealed the hidden names of God that gave power over nature. It showed her visions of the future church, with herself as a great teacher surrounded by disciples who hung on her every word. "But you must tell no one," the angel always cautioned. "The others aren't ready. They would be jealous. They would try to stop what God is doing through you. Keep our meetings secret until the time of revealing. This secrecy felt delicious, like honey hidden in her cell. During the day, she continued her routine with the other hermits in the loose community scattered across the mountain. She wove baskets. She prayed the common prayers. She shared simple meals. But inside, she glowed with the knowledge of her special status. When Sister Pelagia complained about the difficulty of discerning God's will, Matrona almost laughed. If only they knew how clearly God spoke to those he truly favored. The angel's teachings were intoxicating in their complexity. It revealed numerical codes hidden in the Psalms. It explained how the positions of stars at the time of prayer could amplify spiritual power. It taught her words in what it claimed was the language of heaven. Beautiful, meaningless syllables that felt important on her tongue. You are learning the true Christianity, it told her. What the church teaches is milk for babes, but you are ready for meat. You are ready for the secret wisdom preserved for the elect. The pride grew like a tumor, but dressed in such beautiful garments, she couldn't see it for what it was. When she looked at her sisters now, she saw their simplicity as stupidity. Their contentment with basic prayers seemed like spiritual laziness. Their struggles with ordinary temptations appeared pathetic compared to the cosmic revelations she was receiving. But bodies tell truths that minds can rationalize away. Despite the angel's glorious presence, Matrona noticed she was exhausted after each visit. Her sleep became fitful, filled with dreams of falling. Her appetite vanished, not the clean fast of spiritual discipline, but a nauseous rejection of food. Most telling of all, her prayers began to feel hollow when the angel wasn't present. The simple words she'd prayed for years turned to ash in her mouth. It was Amma Theodora who first sensed something wrong. The old woman had developed sensitivity to spiritual atmospheres after years of wrestling with her own demons. When she visited Matrona's cell to borrow thread, she paused at the threshold, nostrils flaring like an animal scenting danger. "What have you been burning in here?" she asked. "Nothing unusual, the same incense as always." Theodora's eyes narrowed. "No, there's something else. Something that smells like lightning and honey mixed. Something that makes my skin crawl." "You're imagining things," Matrona said. Too quickly, too defensively. But the seed of doubt was planted. That night, when the angel appeared in its usual glory, Matrona looked closer. The light was brilliant, yes, but did it illuminate or merely dazzle? The face was beautiful, but was there warmth in that beauty or just perfection? The teachings were complex, but did they bring her closer to God or just make her feel superior to others? "You're doubting," the angel said, and for the first time there was an edge to its melodious voice. This is the test. All mystics face this moment when they must choose between common faith and transcendent knowledge. Will you be ordinary, Matrona, or will you dare to be extraordinary? The appeal to her pride was perfectly calculated. She pushed down her doubts and accepted that night's teaching, a visualization technique that would let her leave her body and visit heaven directly. But when she tried it, instead of ascending, she felt herself sinking into something dark and viscous. She pulled back, gasping, and found the angel watching with what looked almost like hunger. "You failed because you doubted," it said smoothly. "Tomorrow, You must fast completely. Purify yourself of these earthly hesitations. Then you'll be ready for true ascension. But Matrona had learned something from that moment of sinking. She'd felt, for just an instant, what lay beneath the angel's mask of light. And it was hungry. Terribly, cosmically hungry. Not for her soul in some abstract sense, but for her specifically. Her energy, her devotion, her growing pride that fed it like fuel. The next day, breaking the angel's command for secrecy, she sought out Amma Syncletica, known for her gift of discernment. She expected to have to convince the elder of her vision's reality. Instead, Syncletica listened without surprise. "An angel of light," the old woman said when Matrona finished. "Yes, I've met them. They're the most dangerous demons because they give us exactly what we want. Confirmation that we're special, chosen, elevated above the common struggle. Tell me, does your angel encourage humility or pride? It says I'm chosen. Does it draw you into community or isolation? It says the others wouldn't understand. Does it make you love your sisters more or judge them?" Matrona's silence was answer enough. "Here's what you must do," Syncletica said. "Tonight, when it comes, ask it to pray with you. Not to teach you secret prayers, but to join you in the simple Our Father. Watch what happens." That night, Matrona waited with new eyes. The angel appeared as glorious as ever. But now she noticed things. How the light cast no shadows. How its feet didn't quite touch the ground. How its wings moved without disturbing the air. Still beautiful, but beautiful, like a painting of fire, rather than fire itself. "Shall we begin tonight's instruction?" it asked. "First," Matrona said, her heart hammering, "would you pray with me? Just the simple prayer our Lord taught?" The angel's perfect face rippled like disturbed water. "We have moved beyond such elementary practices. I have greater prayers to teach you. But I would like to start with the Our Father. Surely you can join me in that." "Our time is precious. Why waste it on—" "Our Father, who art in heaven," Matrona began. The change was instantaneous. The beautiful mask cracked like eggshell. The light turned sickly, phosphorescent like rotting wood. The perfect face twisted into something ancient and hungry and utterly inhuman. Most horrible of all, the wings crumbled, revealing themselves to be not feathers, but scales. Not white, but the colorless shade of things that live in deep caves. "Hallowed be thy name," Matrona continued, though her voice shook. The thing that had pretended to be an angel writhed as if the words were acid. Its beautiful voice became a shriek that sounded like nails on stone. But Matrona had learned something from the desert mothers who'd gone before. When you've unmasked a demon, you don't stop. You press the advantage. "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done." With each phrase, the false angel diminished. The elaborate glory it had worn peeled away like old paint, revealing something shriveled and pathetic beneath. By the time she reached "Deliver us from evil," it was nothing but a shadow with eyes, hissing at her from the corner of her cell. "You could have been magnificent," it spat. "I would have made you a prophet, a mystic, a saint remembered forever. I'd rather be a forgotten sister who actually knows God than a famous prophet who knows only pride," Matrona replied. "Now leave, and don't come back with your false light. I've seen what you really are." The demon fled, but its departure left a wound. For months afterward, Matrona struggled with the ordinary prayers that had once sustained her. They seemed too simple after the complex revelations she'd received. Her sister's humble faith felt bland after the intoxication of being chosen. She understood then the demon's final cruelty. It had trained her palate for exotic flavors so that bread and water would never satisfy. But she persevered, relearning simplicity, like a child learning to walk. She confessed everything to her community, enduring their mixture of sympathy and suspicion. Some thought her foolish for being deceived. Others thought her proud for believing herself worthy of angelic visitation. A few understood the particular vulnerability of those who genuinely seek God, how that very seeking can be twisted into spiritual pride. She developed new practices based on her hard-won knowledge. A daily examination specifically for pride. Regular confession to sisters she trusted. Most importantly, a commitment to community that kept her from the isolation where false angels flourished. She learned to test every spiritual experience against simple criteria. Does it increase love? Does it build humility? Does it draw me to others or separate me from them? Years later, she would teach younger sisters the signs of false angels, how they flattered rather than challenged, how they promised shortcuts to holiness, how they created dependence rather than freedom, how they always encouraged secrecy. But how can we tell the difference between true and false visions? They would ask. What if we reject a real angel? Better to reject 1,000 real angels than accept one false one, Matrona would reply. True angels understand our caution. They submit to testing. They encourage us to verify their messages with scripture and community. Most importantly, they never make us feel superior to our sisters. Any vision that breeds pride is suspect, no matter how beautiful its packaging. She lived another 30 years on that mountain, known for her steady faith and practical wisdom. She never received another extraordinary vision, never heard heavenly voices, never saw angels, real or false. And she counted this absence as a blessing. She'd learned that the ordinary struggles of daily faith were adventure enough, that simple prayers, sincerely prayed, were worth more than all the secret revelations in heaven or hell. When young mystics came seeking advice about their visions, she would listen carefully, then ask 3 questions. Does it make you humbler? Does it make you love others more? Can you share it openly with your community? If the answer to any was no, she would teach them the prayer that had saved her, the simple Our Father that no demon could speak, no false angel could join, no prideful heart could pray without transformation. Her greatest teaching was also her simplest. Beware of any spirituality that makes you special. God's true touch makes us smaller, not larger. His real presence makes us servants, not masters. If an angel tells you you're chosen above others, it's not from heaven. Heaven's messages always begin and end with love, not the special love for the elect, but the common love that includes everyone, even those we think beneath us. The demon of false light never returned to her, but she knew it was out there, seeking others who yearned to be special, who craved confirmation of their chosen status, who would trade humble truth for glorious lies. Her story became a warning passed through generations of seekers. The most dangerous demon is the one that gives us exactly what we want. The deadliest pride is the one that comes wrapped in humility. The falsest light is the one that blinds us to our common humanity, because Matrona had learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest spiritual victory is discovering you're not special. Sometimes the deepest wisdom is embracing ordinariness. Sometimes the brightest light is the one that shows us we're exactly like everyone else, struggling, failing, trying again, saved not by secret knowledge, but by common grace. The angel of light had promised to make her extraordinary. Thank God she chose to remain beautifully, blessedly ordinary instead. False light fades into honest darkness, while on the Mount of Olives, a woman discovers that phantoms of the past can become prayers for the future. They came to her in order, a procession of the men who had loved her, or thought they had, or had at least loved what she could pretend to be for an evening's entertainment. Pelagia had been the most celebrated actress in Antioch, which meant she'd been the most expensive courtesan, which meant she'd been the most accomplished liar the city had ever produced. Now, in her cave on the Mount of Olives, disguised as the male hermit Pelagius, all those lies came home to roost. The first phantom was Demetrius, the senator who'd kept her for 3 years in a villa overlooking the sea. He appeared exactly as she remembered him. Soft hands, anxious eyes, the way he'd always touched her, like she might break or disappear. In life, he'd written poetry comparing her to Helen of Troy. In death, or whenever this visitation was, he simply stood at the mouth of her cave and wept. "I loved you," he said, the words falling like stones into still water. "I know you never believed it. I know you thought I was just another rich fool. But I loved you. I would have married you if the law allowed. I would have given up everything." Pelagia, who had trained herself to feel nothing during those years of performance, felt something crack in her chest. She wanted to tell him that she'd known, that she'd felt his sincerity, and it had terrified her more than all the violent clients combined. Sincerity was dangerous in her profession. It made you vulnerable, made you believe you could be more than what you were. But she was Pelagius now, a male hermit who spoke to no one. So she remained silent while Demetrius's phantom poured out 20 years of unspoken words. He told her about his marriage to a proper woman, about children who looked nothing like her, about nights when he still dreamed of her performing Medea, her voice carrying tragedy across the theater like a blade. When he finally faded with the dawn, Pelagia thought it was over. A strange night. A product of too much fasting, perhaps, or the mind playing tricks in the thin mountain air. But the next night brought Marcus, the young soldier who'd spent his entire inheritance in 6 months just to keep her attention. Then came Antonius the merchant, Leo the physician, Cyrus the philosopher, who tried to save her soul while renting her body. Night after night they came, these phantom lovers, each with their own grievance or confession or unfinished business. Some accused her of destroying them. Others begged forgiveness for how they'd treated her. A few simply wanted to know if anything had been real, if any moment of their purchased intimacy had contained genuine feeling. For the first weeks, Pelagia tried the traditional responses. Prayer to banish them, fasting to weaken their hold, the sign of the cross to drive them away. But they weren't that kind of demon. They didn't flee from holy words or sacred gestures. If anything, they seemed to grow more solid, more present, as if her spiritual practices were feeding them rather than starving them. It was the 20th visitor who gave her the key. Stephanos, barely more than a boy when he'd come to her, nervous and fumbling, trying to prove his manhood with coin he'd stolen from his father. He appeared not as the man he must have become, but as that terrified youth, still trembling with desire and shame. "I hated you," he said simply, "not because of what we did, but because of how kind you were. You could have laughed at my inexperience. Instead, you were patient, gentle. You made me feel like a man when I was just a scared boy. I hated you for that kindness because it made me realize you were human. It was easier when I could think of you as just a whore." Something shifted in Pelagia's understanding. These weren't demons in the traditional sense. They were more like ghosts, not of the dead, but of relationships that had never been properly alive. Each phantom carried a piece of unfinished business, a conversation that couldn't happen in life because she'd been Pelagia the actress, the courtesan, the professional illusion. Now, as Pelagius the hermit, stripped of beauty and performance, perhaps truth could finally be spoken. The next night, when Demetrius returned, she broke her vow of silence. "I knew you loved me," she said, her voice rough from disuse. "That's why I was so cruel at the end. Love was the one thing I couldn't perform convincingly, because I'd never felt it myself. Your sincerity made my emptiness visible. I'm sorry." Demetrius's phantom changed, became less solid, more peaceful. "Thank you," he said, and faded not with the dawn, but with a kind of completion, like a sigh finally released. This became her new practice. Each night she would receive her phantom visitors not as demons to be banished, but as unfinished business to be completed. She spoke truths she couldn't have voiced as Pelagia, apologized for specific cruelties, acknowledged the humanity of men she'd trained herself to see as walking purses. Most surprisingly, she began to pray for them. "Lord," she would say after each visitation, "I commend to you the soul of Demetrius, who confused possession with love, but meant no harm. Grant him peace in whatever state he exists. If he lives, help him love his wife. If he has died, may he find the acceptance he sought in thee." The prayers transformed the visitations. Instead of accusations and unfinished longing, the phantoms began bringing memories of small graces. Marcus reminded her of the night he'd protected her from a violent client, taking a beating rather than let harm come to her. Antonius spoke of how her performance of Antigone had made him reconsider his relationship with his own daughter. Even Cyrus the philosopher admitted that their debates about virtue, conducted while she dressed for other clients, had sharpened his thinking more than any academic discourse. "You see," she said to the shade of Leo the physician, who had tried so earnestly to diagnose the sadness he saw beneath her paint, "we were all human together. You weren't just using me, and I wasn't just using you. We were all stumbling towards something we couldn't name, calling it by the wrong names: lust, commerce, entertainment, when maybe it was just loneliness seeking its own cure." This shift in perspective changed everything. The phantoms were no longer tormentors, but teachers, each one revealing a different facet of the human hunger for connection. She began to see her years as a courtesan differently, not just as degradation, but as a strange ministry to the loneliness of men who had nowhere else to take their need for touch, for listening, for the illusion of being known. Some phantoms required more complex reconciliation. There was Ptolemy, who had beaten her when he discovered she was seeing other clients, as if his payments had purchased exclusivity of heart as well as body. His phantom came raging, still violent even in this ghostly form. But when Pelagia refused to cower, when she stood firm and said, "Your violence came from pain. I see that now. You wanted to matter to someone, and the only way you knew was through force." The rage crumbled into weeping. "I was so lonely," the phantom admitted. "My wife despised me. My children feared me. You were the only person who seemed glad to see me, even if it was pretense. When I realized it was just business to you, something in me broke." "It wasn't just business," Pelagia said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "I couldn't love you. I didn't know how to love anyone then. But I didn't hate you. I pitied you. And pity is closer to love than indifference." As months passed, the visitations took on a ritual quality. Pelagia would spend her days in prayer and labor like any hermit, but her nights were dedicated to this strange ministry of reconciliation. She became confessor to phantoms, counselor to shades, the one who could finally hear what the living had been unable to say. She developed a theology of retrospective grace. "God wastes nothing," she would tell the more remorseful visitors. "Even our sins become compost for wisdom. Every transaction between us, however corrupted by commerce and lust, contained seeds of genuine human need. We were all seeking the divine through the flesh, getting it wrong but not entirely wrong." The phantom of a young priest appeared one night, and Pelagia's heart sank. She remembered him, earnest, tormented, coming to her in secret and hating himself with every visit. Surely this shade would bring the harshest condemnation. Instead, he thanked her. "You taught me about grace," he said, "not through your words, but through your patience with my hypocrisy. I preached purity by day and sought you by night. You could have exposed me, destroyed me. Instead, you kept my secret and treated me with the same professional kindness you showed everyone. That kindness haunted me more than any sermon. It made me understand that God's mercy must be even greater than a courtesan's discretion." "Did you find peace?" Pelagia asked. "Eventually, I left the priesthood, married, had children, became a better Christian as a flawed layman than I ever was as a hypocritical priest. The guilt nearly killed me, but surviving it taught me that God prefers honest sinners to lying saints." These testimonies accumulated like prayers. Each phantom that found peace through their conversation seemed to lighten something in Pelagia's own soul. She began to understand that her past wasn't just a burden to bear, but a unique preparation for this ministry. Who else could have offered absolution to these shades? What respectable woman would have understood their particular cocktail of desire and shame? The most difficult visitant came near the end. It wasn't a client, but a woman, Euphemia, another actress who had been Pelagia's rival and sometimes friend. Her phantom blazed with old resentment. "You ruined me," Euphemia accused. "Always more beautiful, more talented, more desired. I spent my whole career in your shadow. Even now, you get to be a holy hermit, while I died forgotten, drinking myself to death in a tavern by the docks." Pelagia felt the weight of this accusation differently than the others. With the men, she had been the professional, in control even when seeming to submit. With Euphemia, she had been an equal who had chosen to compete rather than collaborate. You're right, she said simply. I was vain, cruel. I enjoyed outshining you because it made me feel valuable in the only way I understood. I never thought about what my success cost you. I'm sorry. Sorry? Euphemia's shade laughed bitterly. You're sorry? I wasted my life trying to be you and you're sorry? What else can I offer? I can't change the past. I can't give you back those years. All I can do is acknowledge the harm and pray for your soul. You deserved better. From me, from the world, from yourself. Something in this simple acknowledgement seemed to reach Euphemia's phantom. The blazing resentment dimmed to a softer glow of sadness. I did deserve better, she agreed. We all did. We were artists, Pelagia. We could make people weep with a gesture, laugh with a glance, but they only saw us as bodies for rent. We internalized their gaze, competed for their desire, forgot we had value beyond their hunger. Yes, Pelagia said, we forgot. But perhaps remembering now, even this late, counts for something. You were brilliant, Euphemia. Your Electra made me weep with jealousy. Your comic timing was impeccable. You deserved to be remembered for your art, not your bitterness. The phantom smiled, the first genuine smile Pelagia had seen from any of her visitors. Thank you. No one ever told me I was brilliant. They only told me I wasn't as beautiful as you. Beauty fades. Pelagia gestured to her hermit's garb, her weathered face. But the ability to move hearts through art, that's eternal. You had that gift. You have it still, wherever you are. Euphemia's shade grew translucent, peaceful. Pray for me, rival. Pray for all of us who sold our gifts too cheaply. Every day, Pelagia promised. Every single day. As the visitations continued, Pelagia developed a nightly practice. She would light a candle for each phantom who appeared, praying specifically for their souls. Her cave became a strange shrine to the complicated dead, the men who had desired her, the women who had envied her, the whole tangled web of relationships that had made up her former life. But the most profound transformation was in how she understood herself. She had fled to the desert to escape her past, taken on male disguise to avoid the hunger of men, chosen solitude to atone for years of false intimacy. The phantoms taught her that escape was impossible and unnecessary. Her past wasn't something to flee, but to transform. Every client had been a human being seeking connection. Every transaction had contained genuine need poorly expressed. Every performance had touched real emotions, even through artificial means. She hadn't been just a prostitute or just an actress. She had been a minister to loneliness, a priestess of illusion that pointed toward deeper truths, a broken vessel through which grace had leaked despite everything. This is my penance, she told the phantoms one night when several appeared together. Not the fasting or the solitude or the male disguise. My true penance is seeing you clearly, acknowledging the full humanity of every interaction we shared, carrying the weight of what we all could have been to each other if the world had been different. But it wasn't only penance. It was also redemption. Each phantom reconciled was a piece of her own soul reclaimed. Each conversation completed was a step toward wholeness. She was becoming integrated, not the split person who had been Pelagia by night and nobody by day, but a whole human being who could acknowledge all parts of her history. The visitations began to decrease. not abruptly, but gradually, like a tide receding. Some nights brought familiar faces returning for final words. Other nights brought blessed solitude. Pelagia understood that the work was nearing completion. The unfinished business of her former life was finding resolution. On what would be the last night of visitations, all the phantoms appeared together, a crowd of shades filling her small cave. For a moment, Pelagia felt the old terror. So many hungry faces, so many needs, so many wounds she had inflicted or received. But then she saw them clearly, not as demons or accusers, but as fellow travelers. Each one had been seeking the same thing she had, to be known, to be valued, to matter to someone. They had used the wrong methods, herself included, but the yearning itself was holy. "I bless you all," she said, raising her hands over the ghostly assembly. "Every one of you who sought love in the wrong places, who confused desire with connection, who paid for illusions because reality was too painful. I bless your hunger. I bless your loneliness. I bless even your failures. We were all children of God stumbling in the dark. May you find in death the light we missed in life." The phantoms began to fade, but not with the usual dawn dissolving. They seemed to be moving toward something, drawn by a light Pelagia couldn't see. As they departed, each one touched her, a hand on her shoulder, a kiss on her forehead. Gestures of farewell and gratitude. Demetrius was the last to go. "Thank you," he said, "for then and for now, for the illusion that taught me to recognize truth, for the performance that prepared me for reality. Even our mistakes were part of the pattern." "Go in peace," Pelagia whispered. "All of you, go in peace." The cave emptied. The candles she had lit guttered and died. For the first time in months, Pelagia was truly alone. But it was a different solitude than before. Not the isolation of hiding, but the aloneness of integration. She had faced every ghost, blessed every demon, acknowledged every shadow. Her past was no longer haunting her because she had transformed it into prayer. She lived another decade on that mountain, known to the other hermits as the silent Pelagius, who prayed constantly for the dead. They never knew the full story, how a famous courtesan had become confessor to phantoms, how the most celebrated actress in Antioch had performed her greatest role as a male hermit ministering to shadows. But her real legacy lived in the prayers that rose nightly from her cave. Prayers for the lonely who seek connection in counterfeit forms. Prayers for those who sell and buy human intimacy. Prayers for all who confuse performance with reality, transaction with relationship, flesh with spirit. Because Pelagia had learned the ultimate truth, we are all phantom lovers, seeking the divine through whatever distorted channels we can find. And sometimes the most profound grace comes through the most broken vessels. Sometimes a prostitute's blessing carries more power than a priest's. Sometimes the phantom lovers we flee are the very souls we're meant to save. Her cave on the Mount of Olives became a shrine after her death, though pilgrims never knew exactly what they were venerating. They thought they honored Pelagius, the hermit. In reality, they honored Pelagia, the transformer, who had turned phantom lovers into prayers, hauntings into blessings, the sordid past into sacred present. The phantoms never returned to that cave. They had found what they came for, not the actress or the courtesan, but the human being who could finally see them as they were, who could bless their broken seeking, who could transform mutual using into mutual recognition of the holy hunger that drives us all. In the end, the phantom lovers had been her greatest teachers. They had taught her that no relationship is unredeemable, no past too broken to bless, no ghost too hungry to feed with prayer. They had been her demons and her angels, her torment and her salvation, and in saving them, she had saved herself. The last phantom fades with blessed closure. While in the Sinai desert, a woman discovers that the voices in her head might be students waiting for a teacher. The first voice was so subtle that Anastasia thought it was her own mind, that familiar internal commentary that accompanies solitude. "You're wasting water," it observed, as she took her daily ration. A reasonable thought. Conservation was essential in the desert. She reduced her consumption and thought nothing more of it. But the voice returned the next day. "You're praying incorrectly. Your posture is lazy. God prefers prostration to kneeling." Again. It sounded like self-correction, the kind of internal criticism that drives improvement. She adjusted her prayer posture. Within a week, the single voice had become a chorus. They didn't announce themselves as demons or angels. They simply commented, suggested, criticized, advised. They sounded exactly like her own thoughts, except there were too many of them, and they began to contradict each other. "Fast more strictly," one voice urged. "You're getting soft." "Eat properly," another countered. "You're damaging the body God gave you." "Pray without ceasing," insisted a third. "Rest is also sacred," argued a fourth. Even Christ slept. Anastasia found herself paralyzed between competing directives, each one reasonable in isolation, but impossible in combination. She couldn't fast and eat, pray constantly and rest adequately, conserve water and maintain hygiene. The voices grew louder as her confusion deepened, each one insisting its advice was the path to holiness. After a month of this torment, she sought help from Abba Jonas, an elder hermit known for his wisdom. She expected him to provide prayers of banishment or techniques for silencing the voices. Instead, he asked an unexpected question. "Have you considered that they might be telling the truth?" "Which one?" Anastasia asked desperately. "They all contradict each other." "Exactly," Jonas smiled. "Truth is paradoxical. The spiritual life requires both fasting and nourishment, both prayer and rest, both solitude and community. Perhaps your voices aren't demons to be silenced, but aspects of truth that need to be balanced." "But how can I follow contradictory advice?" "By becoming wise enough to know when each applies. A carpenter doesn't use a hammer for every task, though the hammer insists it's always the right tool. Your voices are like tools, each one useful in its proper context." Anastasia returned to her cell with this new perspective, but implementation proved difficult. The voices didn't appreciate being treated as tools. They grew more insistent, more numerous. Where once there had been 4 or 5, now there were dozens. They commented on everything: her thoughts, her actions, her prayers, even her dreams. "You're not grieving your mother properly," one accused. "You're wallowing in grief instead of accepting God's will," another countered. "Your technique for basket weaving is inefficient. You focus too much on efficiency and not enough on contemplation. Your cell is too comfortable. Your asceticism is prideful performance." The cacophony became unbearable. Anastasia couldn't complete a single action without triggering a debate among the voices. She couldn't pray without commentary on her pronunciation, couldn't work without criticism of her methods, couldn't even sleep without voices analyzing her dreams. In desperation, she tried what seemed like madness, but felt like inspiration. She began to address the voices directly. "You who says I fast too little, what is your name?" The voice seemed startled. I am Severity." "And you who says I fast too much?" "Compassion," came the reluctant answer. One by one, she forced each voice to identify itself. Perfectionism, sloth, ambition, humility. Pride disguised as humility. Fear calling itself prudence. Each voice, when pressed, revealed itself as an aspect of the spiritual life taken to extreme. "So," Anastasia said, sitting in the middle of her cell, like a teacher surrounded by unruly students, "you're all parts of the wisdom I need, but none of you knows how to cooperate. Severity, you're right that discipline matters. But compassion is also right that bodies have limits. Instead of fighting, why don't you teach me when to apply each of your truths?" The voices fell silent, apparently stunned by being addressed as students rather than tormentors. Then Severity spoke, sounding almost sheepish. I suppose there are times when strictness serves growth and times when it becomes cruelty." Exactly! Anastasia felt like she'd made a breakthrough. "And compassion, can you acknowledge that sometimes gentle acceptance becomes complacency?" "Yes," Compassion admitted, "though I prefer to err on the side of mercy." "As you should," Anastasia agreed. "That's your nature. But that's why you need Severity as a balance, just as Severity needs you." What followed was the strangest theological education in desert history. Anastasia became a mediator among her own voices, teaching them to work together rather than against each other. She assigned each voice specific times to speak. Severity got the pre-dawn hours when discipline was needed to rise for prayer. Compassion took the evening, when gentleness helped process the day's struggles. Prudence advised on practical matters. Ambition pushed during work hours, but yielded to humility during prayer. "This is insane," said a new voice she recognized as Doubt. "Welcome, Doubt," Anastasia said calmly. "You're right to question this approach. What concerns you specifically?" Doubt, unaccustomed to being welcomed, stammered. You're talking to voices in your head. That's madness." "Is it?" Anastasia asked. "Or is it recognizing that the mind contains multitudes, that wisdom comes from balancing contradictory truths, that what we call sanity might just be learning to orchestrate our inner voices rather than being tyrannized by them?" As weeks passed, her cell became a strange classroom. She would pose spiritual questions and let the voices debate, moderating their discussions like a patient teacher. "Should I increase my fasting from Lent?" she would ask. Severity would argue for extreme abstinence. Compassion would worry about health. Prudence would suggest moderation. Pride would warn against fasting for show. Humility would question her motives. Through their debate, guided by her questions, a nuanced answer would emerge. Perhaps increased fasting, but with careful attention to her body's signals and regular examination of her motives. The other desert dwellers began to notice changes in Anastasia. Her advice, previously conventional, became remarkably nuanced. She could speak to the severity-minded hermits in their own language, while simultaneously understanding those who struggled with excessive self-punishment. She seemed to contain within herself the entire spectrum of spiritual wisdom. "How do you know exactly what each person needs to hear?" a young sister asked. "I have good teachers," Anastasia replied, smiling at what the sister couldn't hear. The voices that had become her internal counsel, each one contributing its perspective to her understanding. But the real transformation was in how she understood the spiritual life itself. She realized that what she'd taken for demonic assault was actually the natural complexity of the human psyche seeking God. The voices weren't external invasions, but internal aspects that had always been there, suddenly audible in the desert's silence. "We're not demons," Severity admitted one day. "We're you, parts of you that you've never acknowledged or integrated." "I know," Anastasia said. "That's why fighting you was futile. How can I banish parts of myself? The goal isn't your silence, but your harmony." She developed exercises that would later influence contemplative practice. The Council of Voices, where she'd pose a question and listen to each perspective before deciding. The Wisdom Circle, where contradictory truths would be held in creative tension rather than forced resolution. The practice of internal hospitality, welcoming every voice as a teacher, while maintaining authority over the final decision. Years passed. The voices remained, but transformed from tormentors to advisors. Anastasia became known as a teacher of extraordinary wisdom, able to hold paradoxes that broke other minds. Students came seeking her secret, expecting mystical practices or hidden knowledge. ... "Listen to your contradictions," she would tell them. "The voice that says you're worthless and the voice that says you're special. The part that craves solitude and the part that needs community. These aren't enemies. They're the raw materials of wisdom. But like any raw material, they need refinement." She taught them to name their inner voices, to engage them in dialogue rather than battle. Some students fled, convinced she was teaching madness. Others found liberation in discovering that their internal conflicts weren't signs of spiritual failure, but opportunities for integration. "But Amma," one persistent student asked, "how do we know which voice to follow when they all claim truth?" "You learn through practice," Anastasia replied. "A musician doesn't play all notes at once, but learns which combinations create harmony. Your inner voices are similar. Sometimes severity leads and compassion follows, sometimes reversed. The music comes from learning the rhythm of when each voice serves the whole." Her most profound teaching came near the end of her life. A bishop, troubled by reports of her unorthodox methods, came to investigate. He expected to find heresy or madness. Instead, he found a woman of remarkable peace and clarity. "I hear you talk to voices," he said suspiciously. "We all do," Anastasia replied. "Most just don't admit it. When you deliberate on a decision, don't different perspectives arise in your mind? When you're tempted, doesn't part of you argue for virtue while another part argues for vice? I've simply made the implicit explicit, the unconscious conscious. But surely some of these voices are demonic." "Perhaps. But I found that what we call demons often turn out to be unintegrated aspects of ourselves. The demon of pride might be healthy self-respect pushed to extreme. The demon of despair might be appropriate grief denied and distorted. By engaging these voices rather than battling them, I transform demons into teachers. The bishop left puzzled, but oddly comforted. In his own prayers that night, he noticed for the first time the different voices within himself. The part that sought power, the part that genuinely wanted to serve, the fear of inadequacy. Anastasia died peacefully, reportedly in conversation to the end. The sisters who attended her said she seemed to be teaching an invisible class, patiently explaining some point of theology to students only she could see. Her last words were, "Yes, you all have valuable perspectives. The truth includes every voice, but isn't dominated by any single one. Remember that, teach it to others." Her legacy lived on, not in dramatic miracles or extreme asceticism, but in a profound understanding of the human psyche's complexity. She had discovered that the desert doesn't create voices, it reveals the ones that were always there. That madness isn't hearing multiple perspectives, but being tyrannized by one. That wisdom comes not from silencing our inner contradictions, but from teaching them to sing in harmony. The demons she'd thought were attacking her turned out to be her own psyche seeking integration. The voices she'd tried to banish became her greatest teachers. The madness everyone feared became a sanity deeper than simple quiet. Because Anastasia had discovered the secret that threatened simple spirituality. We are not unified beings seeking God, but communities of selves needing orchestration. The spiritual life isn't about achieving inner silence, but about conducting the inner symphony. The voices in our heads aren't invaders, but inhabitants. And our task isn't to evict them, but to help them work together. In the end, her greatest teaching was this: don't fear your inner multiplicity. Don't mistake complexity for pathology. You contain multitudes, and each voice has something to teach. The goal isn't to become simple, but to become harmonious. Let your inner voices debate. Let them contradict. Let them complicate your certainties. That's not spiritual failure. That's spiritual maturity. The desert had driven her sane, not mad. Sane enough to hear clearly the voices everyone carries. Sane enough to teach them wisdom. Sane enough to transform internal chaos into integrated complexity. The voices still speak in that desert. But now they speak of integration rather than domination, of symphony rather than silence, of the strange sanity that comes from acknowledging we are each a community seeking to become a communion. The inner classroom falls silent, while in Tabenesi, an entire community of women discovers that some demons require collective resistance. It began with the dreams. Sister Macaria woke screaming about serpents in her cell. Sister Pelagia saw her dead mother beckoning from the refectory corner. Sister Thecla found herself standing at the Nile's edge at midnight, with no memory of walking there. Within a week, every woman in the monastery was afraid to sleep. Amatalis, the community's leader for 20 years, recognized the signs. She'd seen individual possessions, personal hauntings, the ordinary spiritual warfare that came with desert life. But this was different. This was coordinated, systematic, as if some malevolent intelligence had decided to test whether demons could destroy what humans had built. "We're under siege," she announced at the morning gathering, her voice calm despite the dark circles under every sister's eyes. Not by individual demons, but by something that wants to break our community apart. We must respond as a community, or we'll fall separately. The assembled women, 53 in total, ranging from young novices to ancient hermits, who joined the community in their final years, looked at each other with a mixture of fear and determination. They'd come to Tbilisi for different reasons, but they'd stayed because they'd found something here that solo desert life couldn't provide. The strength of shared purpose, the accountability of witnessed struggle. The particular grace that comes from women supporting women in the spiritual life. Now that grace was under attack. "Tell me your dreams," Talus commanded. "All of them. Let's map what we're facing." One by one, they shared their nighttime terrors. Patterns emerged. The younger sisters dreamed of their families in distress, calling them home. The older ones saw visions of their own deaths, violent and alone. Those who'd fled bad marriages dreamed their husbands had found them. Former prostitutes relived their worst nights. Each dream perfectly crafted to that woman's particular fear. "It knows us," Sister Damian observed, her scholarly mind analyzing even through exhaustion. "Whatever this is, it studied us. It knows exactly where each of us is weakest." But the dreams were just the beginning. Next came the waking phenomena. Tools would break at crucial moments. The well water turned brackish overnight. Carefully copied manuscripts were found burned, though no one had lit fires. Sisters would find themselves in parts of the monastery they didn't remember walking to, doing things they didn't remember starting. Most disturbing were the conflicts. Women who'd lived in harmony for years suddenly erupted in petty arguments. Old resentment surfaced like pus from infected wounds. Theological debates turned vicious. Work assignments became battlegrounds. The careful balance of personality and purpose that made communal life possible began to shatter. "This is what it wants," Talus said during an emergency meeting. "It can't possess 53 women at once, but it doesn't need to. If it can turn us against each other, we'll do its work ourselves." "How do we fight something like this?" young Sister Euphrasia asked, tears streaming down her face. She'd just had a screaming match with her mentor over the proper way to card wool, a task they'd done peacefully together for 3 years. "The same way we do everything here," Talus replied. "Together." She instituted new practices immediately. No one slept alone. They moved their mats into the chapel, creating a dormitory where nightmares could be immediately countered by waking sisters. They established rotating vigils, ensuring someone was always awake and praying. Most importantly, they began corporate confession. "I resented Sister Macaria for her beautiful voice," one woman admitted to the assembly. "When she leads hymns, everyone praises her. I've let that resentment fester for 2 years. I've thought Sister Pelagia was lazy," another confessed. "I do twice as much kitchen work, but she gets the same food. I've harbored anger about it." One by one, they brought their secret grievances into the light. The demons had fed on these hidden resentments, amplifying them, using them as cracks to wedge the community apart. But confession began to seal those cracks. Macaria offered to teach singing to anyone who wanted to learn. Pelagia revealed that she'd been secretly fasting, eating less so there would be more for others, which explained her apparent laziness. She was simply weak from hunger. "You see," Talus said as understanding dawned, The demon's power came from our secrets, from the things we wouldn't say. It used our silence against us. But confession was only the first step. The siege intensified. Physical manifestations increased. Mysterious injuries appeared on sisters' bodies. Strange voices echoed from empty rooms. The vegetable garden withered overnight, despite careful tending. It became clear that whatever attacked them was escalating because their unity threatened it. "We need a new weapon," Talus announced after a particularly difficult night, when 3 sisters had tried to flee the monastery, convinced their families were dying. Something it won't expect. That's when Sister Syncletike, the eldest at 90, spoke up from her corner. "In my village," she said, her voice creaky but clear, "when evil spirits plagued us, we confused them with joy. They understand fear, anger, despair. But genuine joy? Laughter? They have no defense against that." The suggestion seemed absurd. How could they laugh when under spiritual attack? How could they find joy when exhausted and terrified? But Talus, wise in the ways of paradox, recognized truth when she heard it. "Tomorrow," she announced, "we feast." "Feast?" The community was aghast. "During a siege?" "Especially during a siege. We'll use our emergency stores, prepare the best meal we can, wear our festival clothes, sing the celebration hymns. We'll show this demon that it has no power over our joy." The preparation itself began to shift the atmosphere. Sisters who'd been snapping at each other found themselves laughing over shared cooking tasks. The young ones decorated the refectory with desert flowers. The singers prepared their most jubilant hymns. It felt like rebellion, not against God, but against the oppressive fear that had dominated their days. The feast night arrived. They gathered in the refectory, lit with extra oil lamps, decorated with whatever beauty they could find. The food was simple, but prepared with care. And then, just as they were about to begin, the attacks intensified. Wind howled through solid walls. The lamps flickered without cause. Strange shadows moved independently of their sources. "Now," Talus commanded, "sing." They began with a hymn of praise, voices shaky at first, but growing stronger. The shadows pressed closer. They sang louder. The wind howled. They laughed at its fury. Sister Syncletike began telling stories of her youth. Genuinely funny tales of mishaps and misunderstandings. Soon the refectory rang with real laughter. "Dance!" Talus called out, and the younger sisters began the simple circle dances of their homelands. Others clapped rhythm. The eldest swayed in their seats. The refectory became a celebration in defiance of the siege. And something shifted. The shadows retreated to the corners. The wind died to whispers. The oppressive presence that had haunted them for weeks began to thin like morning mist. But more importantly, the sisters rediscovered something they'd almost lost. The fierce joy of their chosen life, the laughter that comes from shared purpose, the strength that emerges when women refuse to be divided. They maintained the celebration practices, weekly feasts, no matter how simple. Daily laughter exercises where they'd share amusing observations, dance as prayer, joy as resistance. The demon, faced with a community that refused to despair, gradually weakened. "It's still here," Sister Damian observed after a month of the new practices. "I can feel it prowling the edges, but it can't get in anymore." "Because we're not giving it what it feeds on," Talus explained. "Fear, division, despair, secret resentments. We've learned its diet and refused to provide it. But the deepest transformation was in how they understood community itself. They'd thought their unity came from shared rules, common purpose, similar practices. The siege taught them that true unity came from something deeper, the choice to face together what couldn't be faced alone, to find joy in the midst of struggle, to transform warfare into dance. They developed new traditions, the Vigil of Laughter, where they'd stay awake telling increasingly absurd stories until everyone was breathless with mirth. The Dance of Defiance, performed whenever oppression threatened. The Feast of Fools, where they'd deliberately do things badly, sing off-key, dance clumsily, cook terrible food, and celebrate their imperfections as proof of their humanity. We're not trying to be perfect, Talus would remind them. We're trying to be whole, and wholeness includes joy as much as struggle, laughter as much as tears, celebration as much as asceticism. Word of their successful resistance spread through the desert network. Other communities facing similar sieges sought their advice. Talus and her sisters developed a manual of sorts, not a traditional guide to fighting demons, but a handbook for communal joy as spiritual warfare. The demon expects certain responses, they wrote. Fear, which isolates us. Anger, which divides us. Despair, which weakens us. When we respond instead with joy, unity, and celebration, we break its strategic framework. It literally doesn't know what to do with communities that party in the face of persecution. But they also acknowledge the cost. Maintaining joy during siege wasn't natural or easy. It required deliberate choice, communal support, and the vulnerability of shared laughter when everything in them wanted to hide and weep. Some sisters found it harder than traditional asceticism. I can fast for weeks, Sister Macaria confessed. I can pray all night, but to laugh when I'm terrified, to dance when I want to curl up in a ball, that's the hardest discipline I've ever practiced. Which is probably why it works, Talus observed. The demon calculates based on normal human responses. Joy in the face of assault isn't normal. It's supernatural. It's evidence of something beyond human capacity. As months passed, the siege's effects lingered, but transformed. And nightmares still came occasionally, but now the sisters had protocols. The dreamer would wake her cellmate, who would immediately begin telling jokes or singing funny songs until the dream's power broke. Conflict still arose, but they addressed them immediately with a combination of confession and communal dancing that made staying angry almost impossible. We're not the same community we were before the siege, Sister Damier noted, documenting their transformation. We're stranger, more joyful, less concerned with conventional piety. We've discovered that holiness might look more like a celebration than a funeral. The demon never fully left. They could sense it sometimes, lurking at the periphery, waiting for them to forget their lessons and sink back into isolated struggle. But it had lost its power to destroy them. They'd learned that some battles are won not through victory, but through refusing to fight on the enemy's terms. Visiting monastics often found Tabanisi disconcerting. They expected to find traumatized women barely holding together after demonic siege. Instead, they found a community that laughed easily, celebrated frequently, and spoke of their demonic attack the way veterans speak of wars, with a mixture of seriousness and dark humor. "Oh, the siege?" Sister Euphrasia would say cheerfully. "Best thing that ever happened to us. Taught us that demons hate parties. Now, excuse me, I need to practice my terrible dancing for tonight's Feast of Fools." This approach scandalized traditionalists. Spiritual warfare was supposed to be serious. Demons were supposed to be fought with fasting and prayer, not feasting and laughter. But Tabanisse's results spoke for themselves. While other communities fell apart under concerted attack, they thrived. "You're teaching dangerous ideas," one visiting abbot warns Tallis, "making light of demonic activity, encouraging frivolity in those who should be sober." "With respect," Tallis replied, "we're not making light of demons. We're making light in spite of demons. There's a difference. Our joy isn't ignorance of evil, it's defiance of it." We laugh not because the siege wasn't real, but because it was real, and we survived it together. She took him to the chapel, where they'd painted a mural commemorating their experience. It showed demons fleeing from dancing women, shadows dispersing before laughter, darkness retreating from a feast table. But if you looked closely, you could see the cost in the women's faces, the exhaustion beneath the smiles, the determination behind the dance. This wasn't naive joy, but chosen joy, deliberate joy. Joy as an act of war. "This is our testimony," Tallis explained, "that communities bonded by joy are stronger than those bonded only by suffering. That celebration is as essential to spiritual life as asceticism. That demons flee not from perfect piety, but from imperfect people refusing to be divided." As years passed, Tabanissi became a pilgrimage site for communities under spiritual attack. They came expecting exorcism techniques and left with party planning skills. They came seeking prayers of protection and left with songbooks of silly hymns. They came broken by demonic assault and left understanding that sometimes the best defense is a good feast. The community developed their teachings into what they called the theology of sacred celebration. Its principles were simple but revolutionary. Joy shared multiplies. Sorrow shared divides. Demons feed on isolation. Community starves them. Laughter is a form of prayer that bypasses the mind and speaks directly to the spirit. Imperfection celebrated is holier than perfection performed. The kingdom of God looks less like a funeral and more like a wedding feast. "But what about suffering?" critics asked. "What about taking up our cross? What about the necessity of struggle in spiritual growth?" "We're not denying suffering," the sisters would respond. "We know suffering intimately. We survived a demonic siege. But we're saying that suffering alone doesn't transform. It's how we hold suffering together, how we transform it through shared joy that makes us holy. The cross leads to resurrection. We're just practicing resurrection a little early." Old Sincladige, who'd first suggested joy as weapon, lived to see their approach spread across the desert. On her deathbed at 95, she gathered the community one last time. "I've lived through famine and plenty, peace and persecution, individual trials and communal siege," she said. "And I tell you truly, the demon that attacked us gave us a gift. It taught us that our greatest strength isn't in our individual holiness, but in our collective joy. Keep laughing, sisters. Keep dancing. Keep feasting. The demons will never understand it, and that's precisely why it works." She died during the community's weekly celebration, passing from earthly feast to heavenly banquet so gently that it took several minutes for anyone to notice. They found her smiling, hands still raised as if clapping to their singing. They buried her with joy rather than excessive mourning, knowing she'd want her funeral to confuse any lingering demons with its celebration. The siege of Tbilisi became legendary in monastic history, though often misunderstood. Later chroniclers, uncomfortable with the idea of nuns defeating demons through parties, would try to spiritualize the account. They'd emphasize the prayer vigils while downplaying the dance parties, highlight the fasting while ignoring the feasting. But the women who lived it knew the truth. They discovered that demons, for all their supernatural power, were remarkably conventional in their expectations. They knew how to respond to fear, anger, despair, division. They had strategies for breaking down traditional defenses. But joy? Collective celebration? Communities that responded to attack with parties? This broke their entire paradigm. We didn't defeat the demon, Tallis would clarify in her final years. We made ourselves unpalatable to it. We became a community it couldn't digest. Our joy was indigestible. Our unity was unbreakable. Our laughter was unbearable to beings that feed on misery. The last recorded attack on Tbilisi came 10 years after the initial siege. A new kind of assault. Subtle whispers that their joy was prideful, their celebrations excessive, their methods unorthodox. The community recognized it immediately as the same demon trying a different strategy. Their response: they threw their biggest party yet. 3 days of feasting, dancing, storytelling, and laughter. They invited neighboring communities to join them. They shared their food with the poor. They turned defense into generosity, resistance into gift. The demon, faced with joy that multiplied rather than diminished under attack, finally gave up. The whispers ceased. The oppression lifted. Tbilisi had won not through might, but through mirth. Not through individual heroics, but through communal celebration. Their victory song, composed during the siege and sung for generations after, captured their revolutionary understanding. We dance in the darkness. We feast in the famine. We laugh at the shadows that seek to divide. For joy is our weapon, and love is our armor, and demons flee confusion when communities party with pride. Not pride in themselves, but pride in the God who could turn siege into celebration, attack into opportunity, spiritual warfare into sacred dance. They'd learned the ultimate secret, that hell has no strategy for heaven's joy. That demons, for all their cunning, never expect the party. And so Tbilisi danced on, a community that had faced hell and chosen to laugh, that had stared into the abyss and decided to throw a feast on its edge. They'd transformed spiritual warfare from grim endurance into defiant celebration. The demons never returned. How could they? What was the point of attacking a community that turned every assault into an excuse for a party? The sisters had won by changing the game entirely. And in doing so, they discovered something that would echo through centuries of monastic wisdom. Sometimes the most profound spiritual victory looks less like conquest and more like celebration. Sometimes the deepest wisdom is remembering how to laugh. Sometimes the strongest communities are those that party in the face of the powers that seek to destroy them. The siege was over. The feast continued. And somewhere in the spiritual realm, demons gathered to warn each other. Avoid Tbilisi. Those women are incomprehensible. They fight with joy. They resist with laughter. They defend with dance. We have no weapons against such beautiful insanity. And the sisters, had they heard this assessment, would have laughed and laughed and laughed. The celebration echoes fade into the desert night as our journey through invisible battles draws to its close. And so, dear dreamer, we close this chapter of invisible battles and hard-won victories. The desert mothers have shown us landscapes of the soul we might never have imagined, where dead families become teachers, where daily demons become dance partners, where shapeshifters train discernment, where phantom lovers transform into prayers. Did you recognize yourself in their struggles, in Theodora's midnight conversations with guilt, in Sarah's daily battle with desires that refuse to die, in Syncletika's exhausting effort to see through beautiful deceptions? These ancient women faced the same invisible enemies we all know, the voices that accuse, the memories that haunt, the temptations that wear familiar faces. But they taught us something revolutionary. That spiritual warfare isn't about dramatic exorcisms or spectacular victories. It's about the daily choice to stay on the battlefield when everything in you wants to flee. It's about learning that our demons often carry twisted gifts of self-knowledge. It's about discovering that what we fight might be better befriended, what we fear might be better understood, what attacks us might be our strictest teacher. If you're still awake, wrestling with your own shadows, leave a sword emoji in the comments below. Honor these warrior women who fought in silence and darkness, so we might understand that we're not alone in our battles. Your struggles, however modern they seem, echo across the centuries to meet theirs. Rest now, knowing you've learned their secrets. That Theodora's tea party approach to inner demons might serve you better than endless battle. That Sarah's patient endurance might outlast what violence cannot defeat. That Syncletika's careful discernment might help you see through your own beautiful deceptions. That transformation is possible, even for the parts of yourself you've tried to abandon. But remember, their greatest lesson wasn't about defeating demons. It was about recognizing that the line between demon and teacher, enemy and educator, often blurs in the desert of the soul. They showed us that spiritual maturity might look less like conquest and more like integration, less like silence and more like learning to conduct the symphony of voices we all carry. Next time on The Sleepless Nun, we'll meet the women who took these desert lessons and built great abbeys that would shape medieval Europe. Women who wielded more power than queens, who corresponded with popes and kings, who proved that spiritual authority could wear a feminine face. The age of the abbesses is coming, when holy women stopped asking permission and started building empires of prayer. But that's a story for another night. For now, let the desert mothers' hard-won wisdom settle into your dreams. Let their courage in facing the invisible strengthen you for your own battles. Let their revolutionary approaches, hospitality to shadows, patience with persistence, joy as resistance, seep into your spiritual imagination. Sleep peacefully, spiritual warrior. Whatever demons dance at the edges of your consciousness, whatever voices whisper in your darker hours, whatever memories rise unbidden in the night, you now know you're in good company. Women have been facing these battles for centuries, and more importantly, they've been winning. Not through might, but through wisdom. not through perfection, but through integration. Not alone, but together. The desert sleeps, the demons rest, and you, dear listener, carry forward the flame of their courage. May your own invisible battles be transformed by their witness. May your demons become your teachers. May your shadows become your strange companions on the journey toward wholeness. Until next time, remember, you are never alone in the dark. The Desert Mothers stand with you, their ancient victories lighting your modern path. Sweet dreams, brave soul. The battle continues, but so does the victory. And sometimes, just sometimes, they're the same thing.